All right. Hello and welcome everyone once again to the full roster Warframe review. It has been 13 years of Warframe, and here for the 2026 review, we have 63 unique Warframes to talk about. To very quickly talk about what the grades are going to look like here. There is an entirely separate video that goes into more depth about more detail of how I grade things. There's also a page on my website, brosheim.com, and also the whole tier list, which you can see all together, is also on brosheim.com, which should be linked in the description down below. With that, to briefly go over the grades just so no one's confused, we have S at the very top, with F at the very bottom, and A, B, C, D in the middle. For that, the big difference with how I tier list things and how a lot of other people have decided to tier list things. S rank, not a good thing on my tier list. S rank is probably going to be nerfed, and also it probably does deserve to be nerfed. So you probably don't want your favorite thing in S rank. On the opposite end of that, F rank. F rank is a true failure, which means in order to get an F, you need to be bad even in like regular path content in this game. It needs to be severely dire. So we have very big extremes on either side. That being said, being on the higher end in like the A category is good. That does not mean that falling down into the B category means the Warframe is bad, and C rank doesn't mean that you can't play the Warframe. Now D rank, things might be a little bit more of a struggle, but those middle ranks are more of a gradient among strengths and weaknesses and what's currently important in the game of Warframe, and not this Warframe is useless because they're in C rank. With that being said, let's start up. We are, of course, going to, as usual, be going in alphabetical order, starting with Ash, as we have not gotten anyone in the alphabet before him in all these years. Ash, over these 13 years, has changed a lot and not changed at all in so many ways. Ash has been a good Warframe for a very long time, but just has never really been able to break into anything above B+, where he still remains. That being said, as I mentioned, B is not a bad rank. He can do tremendous damage with Bladestorm, especially where single targets that are affected by it are concerned, especially if you combine this with helmets that are available, such as Kullervos or Banshees. But that tremendous damage, unfortunately, does not come quickly. This is a ability that is going to affect enemies relatively slowly, and the total kill rate that you're even possible to get with this is just simply not that high where you usually want it to be. It does shine in missions like Disruption, where the one big guy is the focus, but other than that, it's hard to often find a place where this is going to be truly useful, as just the mark and execute nature of it is also just a little bit clunky and usually doesn't play super nice with teammates, which is why you'll probably find most Ash players not at all, because they're going to be playing solo. With that, though, it is not super hard to survive as Ash. Smokescreen is imminently recastable with the current mod suite that we have access to today, even with its lower than normal duration for invisibility skills. More than enough to stay invisible all the time. And of course, there are arcanes and such which can be utilized with Bladestorm to keep you invisible on top of your invisibility, should you really need it, though that's not really necessary anymore. Other than that, though, that's where Ash's kit starts to struggle a bit. We have Teleport, which very sadly was not changed to no longer need a target. I will say that is my number one want for Ash, is to make it so that Teleport doesn't need an enemy to go to whenever you use it. This would make Ash actually way faster and much better at a large variety of missions he could be applicable for. That's just with the powers of his kit without the need to target an enemy, like captures, exterminates, spies, you name it. And I think that would be a nice boost in power for Ash overall, just utility wise. But Shuriken, on the other hand, is maybe not savable. This does have an augment that lets it armor strip, but even armor stripping is kind of starting to fall off, where it's good, but the single target armor stripping like Shuriken, or well, mostly single target armor stripping like Shuriken, especially ones that require an augment, just aren't really making it into builds currently, since the big armor changes that occurred still relatively recently, given 13 years of time. So overall, Ash, good Warframe, remains a good Warframe, but just little problems here and there that I think could pretty easily be cleaned up and push him into A rank, especially making it more efficient to output his Bladestorm damage. That could be the easiest thing, I think, to get him up into those higher ranks finally. Atlas, on the other hand, proves that your kit doesn't need to be perfect in order for you to most handily get into and stay in A rank. With the big Exalted changes that happened last year, Atlas is so much better than he was before. The power of Landslide is immense, even for new players. I recently had Atlas be the star of a free-to-play through, my most recent free-to-play through that I did, where Atlas was absolutely irreplaceable. Just incredible, fantastic at just a big variety of tasks, mostly the 1999 calendar, which is a weekly event that you're just going to want to constantly do for most new players. Landslide can do that, and it can do most everything. Landslide is an incredible ability that outputs insane amounts of just raw damage to the enemies in a large radius once you're built for range, up to a like 30-meter explosion uppercut that just eliminates everything that can see you or not see you, as this ability also explodes through walls. It is just absolutely intensely good, and it is the big factor in why Atlas is in A, as it is the thing that he does. Now, of course, Petrify is a good ability. This is a just super hard stun that often will be used to keep enemies in place for your landslide, and it also, should you for some reason ever need it, also boosts the damage of your landslide. But Petrify is another just like good part of Atlas's kit. Then we have to talk about Tectonics, which is just basically completely useless. You're never going to use this skill for basically anything unless there is a weird case where putting it somewhere is going to break AI or not allow a unit to walk somewhere. That's the only time this ever is going to come up, and if it ever comes up in a really major way, I think DE will let enemies walk through it. And then we have the Rumblers. Rumblers are still as dumb as the rocks they're made of, and they just have little to no merit whatsoever, other than you can recast them to turn them into rubble, which you can then apply by picking it up to add to your passive. Your passive rubble that you build up just from killing enemies that have been petrified, or your Rumblers dying. You can get armor that way and also healing that way, and that's really the most use that the Rumblers get, which comes nowhere close to the 100 energy that's necessary for it. I will note that Atlas, in terms of build stuff that is viable, did get a boost this year with the addition of Persistence. You can go for like a Gloom build that utilizes Persistence on Atlas. I will say that I think that that build is just severely unnecessary, as you are already totally invincible while you are casting Landslide. So anything that you can cast Landslide on simply will not kill you anyway at any level. So that is pretty much unnecessary, and Atlas is maybe the big outlier in A rank in general for having multiple abilities that kind of do nothing, but just having one button that is so unbelievably good I can't not recognize it. With all the talk you just heard about Atlas, unfortunately the opposite can also be true. Banshee's sonar is able to be stacked on enemies repeatedly for overlapping weak points that can let you hit damage cap with basically anything that exists in the entire game. And that is much better than it sounds. Unfortunately, this usually just comes to nothing and doesn't really matter, as the weapons you should be using normally anyway are more than strong enough to kill whatever you happen to be shooting, and you don't want to aim at another sub-weak point that also doesn't apply properly to almost any hard target you'd actually need the damage bonus on. Sonar has been kind of not allowed to work for a long time now, and it's very sad to see. In addition to that, the best ability on Banshee, Silence, is better as a subsume. Giving this to other Warframes is awesome, and it's a part of a number of good builds, including one for Ashe, which we've already talked about with Silence's Augment, that Banshee makes no use of whatsoever. Unfortunately, this good ability is not good for Banshee. You can combine the short stun on Silence with Gloom to elongate it to get some safety, but it's just never been quite good enough for a higher rank. Combine that with her two really useless abilities of Sonic Boom, which does have an armor stripping augment like Ashe's one, but we mentioned that that's not really particularly useful, and also this has much shorter range than Ashe's Shuriken, unfortunately, which is less than ideal. And then we have Soundquake. Now, way back in the day, there used to be farms that would just be, you would Soundquake and it would kill all the enemies through walls, and you'd never see the enemies. They'd all just die in super low level missions, and you'd farm. That playstyle is pretty toxic, and DE I think rightfully don't like it, so the likelihood that Soundquake will be good seems pretty much nil. I'm just hoping for the Banshee rework that has to happen at some point, right? She's still in D rank. To end off our starting quartet of Warframes who really haven't changed much, we have Baruuk. Baruuk remains at an A- for the reasons I've stated in the past. He is intensely powerful. His 3 is an incredibly good defensive ability. His 2 is great crowd control. His 1, if you're going to use it, is just total invincibility while it's active, which is good. And Serene Storm, if you can manage its meter, is just one of the most devastating abilities in the whole game, pumping out millions and millions and millions of damage just in any direction, in any combination of mods you really want. It can use influence, direct damage, really just the world is your oyster as long as you have meter. And the as long as you have meter is tough. Whenever Baruuk is in a mission with other like high quality Warframes that are good at the game mode that you're in, it can be difficult to find alive enemies to build your meter with lull, and I have found elude builds to also be less than consistent at building up that meter effectively whenever I have effective teammates. Now, of course, Baruuk is amazing solo. Whenever you get to manage all that stuff by yourself, there's very little he can't do, with only, of course, the big downside, which is if you have a ton of overguarded enemies, they're not affected by lull, which makes it a little harder to get meter. But the moment you have that meter, you just wipe the floor with everything that can see you or can't see you in some cases as well. So Baruuk is intensely powerful, but the downsides with how that power is applied can be a little tough. Now we get to talk our first big change on the list. It took a rework and an augment, but thankfully Caliban has moved up from C all the way up to B+. I think Caliban is in a pretty reasonable spot right now, where he has some clunk to him with how things are going, where he is really making use of Razor Gyre and its augment to nuke enemies and have infinite energy and always put your shields back on and so on and so forth. Razor Gyre kinda does everything. You summon your guys on Lethal Progeny, and then you just use Razor Gyre with the augment to zoop enemies up or just buff your dudes so they can kill everyone that you can see. Even though this has really clunky, weird level scaling, it does work pretty well for quite a number of levels, and you're really not going to have any problem surviving because Razor Gyre is so free. Combine that with the 2, it is a damage buff. It is a damage vulnerability, which stacks with pretty much everything else you can do in terms of damage output. It is a stun, and it does come up, and it's not a bad ability. And if you need that damage multiplier, you also have the defense reduction of Fusion Strike, which is defense reduction for both shields and also armor. And this, in pretty much any Caliban build, is going to be a complete armor strip right away on whatever you shoot it at. And while I do think it is a little clunky and slow, and generally I do like to avoid using it, all of his abilities are pretty usable right now. And just like the Razor Gyre plan does work. It works pretty well. I don't think that it works A level, but B+ level, I think he's in a pretty solid overall position currently. I would definitely like to see some more augments. Maybe we can get a little bit more solidity overall, but things are looking up for Caliban. Speaking of things looking up, but maybe only a couple degrees, I have moved Chroma up from C+ to B-. Now, there is a few factors to this. There's, of course, the new persistence build for Chroma that does, of course, let you have much more survivability than Chroma's really almost ever had in the game's history, because persistence is very good. But there are a number of other builds that are, of course, putting him in this position. He is the de facto credit farmer, whether that is, you know, if you're going to go profit taker, if you're a speedrunner there, and can do that for credits. But also the 1999 Vault Farm is incredibly good for him. And there are a couple other more niche builds that you can use for him in content that makes him not so reliant on weaponry, utilizing Nova's 1 and such to get some good performance out of him. It is notable that I did not do it before making this video, but there will be a new Chroma builds video coming out that shows off a few more things that you can do with him, which is the reason why he's at B- now. If it was just my most recent video before this, it probably could have kept him at C+, but I was considering it either way. There were some good conversations that were had in my content council in the Discord, which subs and patrons get access to argue with me before this list comes out. And good points were made in there, and some stuff was found that I think Chroma at B- is actually what makes sense this year. our first Warframe that doesn't have a prime, let's talk about Citrine. Now, right off the bat, Citrine is a Warframe whose grade I have not changed. I have had her remain at A-, and this is mostly because things haven't changed for her. Unfortunately, she still is kind of reeling from the Fractured Blast being a bit worse than I really want it to be, with enemy health going up and their armor going down. The slash damage that this was using to kill enemies is a bit less effective, but a new augment that lets you use Prismatic Gem with 4-legged companions lets you do some pretty goofy stuff, and the buffs that you can output with Prismatic Gem are quite unique, alongside, of course, very good support with kicking out 90% DR, though that has waned in value a little bit with all the Persistence Warframes running around right now. But the healing for them has not waned at all. And in fact, the healing has gotten much better than it's ever been. So I think it's maybe a bit of an even trade there, where if you are running into Persistence frames, they're always going to appreciate more healing, as that's just always going to help them. And anyone who's not on that kind of a plan is always going to love the DR that you can provide. And realistically, even the Persistence frames will like it when they take less than 500 damage. But besides that, you have Crystallize. Crystallize I'm less big on, but of course this can be used to hard stun a number of different kinds of enemies, acolytes and the like, if you do keep this ability around. Though for me, it is one that I do tend to want to replace, as I can still trigger Prismatic Gem very easily with Fractured Blast, and Fractured Blast is, of course, a resourcing ability to give us unlimited amounts of just energy and health orbs and all the like that. So still a really good support Warframe that's just going to be helping the squad, applying buffs, doing good things like companion synergies, and getting nukes through those synergies when she needs it. So very, very good solo, very good in a group, usually a great add to a team. Not too many bad things to say about Citrine, though I do wish that they would buff up her one. Our still fairly new from 1999 Site 09 edition has not moved at all for me. I have kept Site once again at a nice solid A-. The minus here mostly comes from, I think, the overall main game plan of playing Site regularly, where of course you're using Neutralize with the Neutralizer, getting headshots with Evade, and empowering your gun with Resupply while shooting enemies through infinite walls with Seek. That game plan works, but it is a little bit managey. You do need to be getting those headshots, and similar to Baruuk, if you have effective teammates, it can sometimes leave you in a bit of a pickle where you're totally visible and a couple enemies can catch you out and do some real damage to you in just his normal game plan. Now, of course, there is his much less normal game plan, which is the zoom and boom style Site. And I do think that there is a strong argument that without that style of play, I might want to move Site down to B+. But with that style of play where you can just equip a Tsar or the Icarius, a number of other explosive weapons are applicable for that. I think the Torrid as well you could use. With Resupply, all the weapons basically that got nerfed in terms of not having enough ammo, turns out when you give them constant forced procs and infinite ammo without the need to ever reload, you can do some messed up stuff. So that build is quite good. It also, similarly though, is not entirely trivializing and is relatively high effort, with you needing to basically press Resupply every second and a half in order to keep up your shield, in order to not just die, because you don't ever use Evade on that build. But you can hit it, but it's just simply not going to stay up for very long. And it's a bit of a weird thing, as I do think that build is not really Site 09 so much as it is Resupply, with some interesting weapon interactions, but that is, of course, still unique to Site. It's Dagath, a Warframe that you probably would be forgiven for forgetting about had you not recently gotten her for free through a bunch of alerts, and for her not having that recent deluxe skin. Dagath has remained from last year to this year at a B-. I think this is still pretty appropriate for where Dagath currently sits. I will say, in my current build for her, which I do think is solid, I do really dislike that removing Rakali's cavalry generally feels correct, as this ability is her whole thing. But the removal of it and just relying on Grave Spirit in order to make you invincible and be a get out of jail free card, combined with Doom plus Breach Surge plus the weird sides, being able to use that Doom effect to execute enemies and generate Breach Surge sparks that are going to do millions of damage. That whole setup works quite well. In addition to that, just Grave Spirit in general can be built a couple different ways. Its augment allows you to go a different direction with it that I know a number of people are into. And there's just a few good options for what you can do with Dagath. The thing I will say is that I do think it's a little bit low on the overall performance factor. I don't think that this has really high highs. And I'm really hoping that there are some augments that Dagath is going to get that can really help give her those high highs and maybe bring back the horses. Now, Dante, I have nothing but good things to say. You know it, I know it. He's still at A+. Dante is one of the strongest Warframes in the game currently. His toolbox is absolutely unbelievable. Noctua, as an exalted weapon, incredibly powerful, not very energy intensive, does insane amounts of damage, huge heat procs, its ult fire is never even normally necessary, and it just mows down anything you need it to mow down. Take this to ETA, EDA, level cap, it really does not matter. Noctua is just a house in terms of just having a weapon that is always going to be good on Dante. Having a weapon that's always going to be good combines very well with Light Verse and its effects. Now, all the verses and, of course, Final Verse we do need to talk about together. There are the combinations. So you have a Triumph, Tragedy, Word Warden, and Page Flight. So you're usually going to just cast all of these buffs, which are everything except Tragedy, and you're going to ignore Tragedy. Tragedy is the use Dark Verse twice and then press Final Verse AoE effect that generally at this point never gets used. It's the thing that got nerfed on his kit, and we usually just avoid using it at all costs and just use everything else. Thankfully, that still leaves him with more good abilities than most Warframes even have buttons to press, because just pressing Light Verse gives you and everyone around you a bunch of Overguard, which functionally is going to make you really, really survivable, especially whenever you press Light Verse twice and cast Triumph, which makes it so that yours and all of your allies' kills give Overguard. This is one of, if not the best supporting defensive skills in the entire game, and is absolutely unbelievably strong. Then you have the two combinations, which is Dark Verse and Light Verse, and then the inverse of that, of course, Light Verse and then Dark Verse. So we have Word Warden, which is you give yourself and all of your allies a copy of Noctua. This is just a little bit of additional damage for your entire team who shoots guns, which is pretty good. This is actually relevant on a number of harder targets that you might want to melt down very quickly, and is, of course, very useful in those ETA, EDA situations where people don't have good things equipped, but usually comes up much less. Then Page Flight. Page Flight summons a bunch of completely invincible Peregrims that do a way better job than you would expect at just making it so enemies aren't looking at you or any of your teammates, so you can just have max Overguard all the time. And in addition to that, they put status vulnerability on all of these enemies and just make your Noctua even stronger. It is an incredibly, incredibly good set of abilities, with Tragedy being the only thing that you're usually going to ignore. And even that cast, you know, in the right circumstances, is going to kill everything that you can see. Besides that, also as just like another utility note, Dark Verse opens all of like the crates and does object damage for levels, so it's just good to be casting it sometimes. So whenever you're just throwing your buffs on, you can just throw out some Dark Verses to just like farm materials that come out of interactables in a level. So just he can just do everything. Dante just gets to do absolutely everything. Now, in the realm of not getting to do everything, let's talk about Ember. So unfortunately, I do think it is correct to move Ember down from her B rank down to a B- rank. This is for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, Ember still has her positives, where her Fire Blast is an armor strip. With its augment, you can add Overguard, and that's really solid, you know, attack on enemies and survivability for yourself in very high-level situations. Your second ability, Immolation, is, of course, the meter that you have to manage. It has downsides at the top, which is still a little rough. And you, of course, do need to build enough of that Immolation meter in order to use your Fire Blast effectively as an armor strip. And that is like your survivability circle here. Now, with the advent of Persistence, you would generally expect that Ember could be built that way. And you would be right. You could build Ember that way. Unfortunately, that kind of gets rid of most of Ember's positives, where Persistence builds don't use anything that Immolation does, so you never use this ability, and you don't need anything that Fire Blast does, and because you're using Persistence setups, and you don't need the Overguard, and you just don't need any of the stuff that this does. And you certainly don't need Inferno, which Inferno, unfortunately, at the current stage of the game, in lower level missions, does enough damage. You cast it a few times, and you can kill every enemy that you can see most of the time, especially if they're kind of like, lancers and regular dudes. But Inferno just is not really a good enough ability to keep up in higher levels. I really, really desperately wish that this had the restacking ability that Gauss's 3, the fire part of it, has whenever he's on redline mode, where this could really scale up and be good against high-level enemies that are vulnerable to heat. That would be really, really nice. I would love to see that, but unfortunately, she doesn't do that. So if you take her into that other realm of survivability, you really ignore most of her kit, throw Gloom on her, and then you just get the augment from Fireball, and the basic effect of Fireball is nothing. So you just get a heat buff and persistence Gloom, which is just not a lot for Ember to be doing. It's a thing you can do, but it's not much of the Ember part of it really affecting it. So there's a number of different directions you can take her. You can still focus on Inferno and have some success with it, but I really think that there is really a place where just the numbers need to get better for Ember. Now, I know I just did a lot of asking for buffs for Ember, but what are we doing about Equinox, ladies and gentlemen? Equinox, I am moving down from C- to D rank. Equinox just kind of has nothing realistically going on anymore. Both Mend and Maim. Maim can, in theory, still clear enemies sort of sometimes effectively, where your weapons are already clearing effectively. You sometimes get a little pop. That is something. And the Mend side of this can also, in theory, be part of a tanking setup whenever it is used alongside Pacify. Provoke is mostly nothing. And then we have Rest and Rage, which the Rage side of it, in theory, it's mostly single target there and not really worth spamming. The Rest side is really useful for farming animals in the open worlds. I wouldn't probably use it for much else besides that, and it's also the Subsume, so you're better off giving it to an invisible or very fast Warframe like Titania for those purposes. And then Metamorphosis swaps you between them. There is a kind of cute build with the augment for Metamorphosis where you'll have just a little AI knockoff Wukong one to shoot guys for a little while. But overall, it's tough out here for Equinox. There's just not a lot going on. It's fine, and you can make it work, and you can tank a bit on night form, or try and desperately make Maim work on day form, or swap between for the Metamorphosis little setup, but none of it is particularly good, and none of it is stuff that I can really eagerly suggest you go out and do or build. Gonna need a rework. Just like Banshee, gonna need a rework for this one, I think, and I don't know if it's gonna be worth the EE's time, because there's kind of a lot to this kit that would need to change, I think. Now we get to talk about Excalibur, and with that, of course, this is one of our starters, so we do need to mention the starter Warframes a little bit here. So, between Excalibur, Volt, and Mag, all three of them are all, notably, and I know spoilers for the rest of the list, at A-. They're all collectively at A-. I think that if you are starting Warframe, you can pick any of them. They all have successful high-level builds to build into that you are going to almost assuredly be happy with if you like them as a Warframe. Now, from the them as a starter standpoint, I will say that I do think you should not pick Excalibur. I think that Volt and Mag are both better starts than Excalibur, but that is not really Excalibur's fault for reasons that would be spoilers to the early game progression of Warframe, unfortunately. With that being said, Excalibur is quite good, and he was recently made a bit better, as I think that the persistence route for building him is very effective, though you do, of course, need to subsume Gloom, as there's no real other amazing solutions besides maybe Healing Return you could theoretically go to that you can utilize to get him there. That is because you use Exalted Blade, usually with Influence, to just murder everything in a direction. You pretty much pick a compass direction, and if there are enemies there soon won't be. Exalted Blade is a very strong ability that when used with Influence and its augment, just procs an absolutely obscene amount of status, and should you actually start hitting anything with the actual sword bit of Exalted Blade, enemies will soon regret that they were within that close range to you. Besides that, Radial Javelin, as a base ability, not very good. With its augment, a tremendous damage buff that you can apply to yourself, which is quite useful. Radial Blind, a decent defensive ability, though you do usually want to look at options like Persistence or Shield Gating for more consistent survivability in the late game. And we have Slash Dash. Slash Dash, when built around, is actually quite good. It makes you invincible while you're doing it, and in addition, you're now invincible in your shields as well as your health, as the most recent update, I believe, to Excalibur. So this is just pure safety, get out of jail free card that also slashes everyone in the chest around you, which is quite nice. So just overall, if you would like to swing a sword and make everyone dead, Excalibur is kind of doing that. You kind of need to outsource your survivability a little bit in a couple different ways that he has pretty easy access to. But other than that, you are definitely getting it done as Excal. Let's talk Frost. I think I was too hard on Frost. I think I was a little bit of price memory on Frost on my last tier list. I had Frost at a B+. I do think it is much more correct to put Frost currently into an A-. Now, Frost really didn't get any big changes or anything that's really happening here. He is not one to use Persistence, and most of the tools that we got this year don't super apply to him. But the value that he has been providing to teams and to himself has been quite good. With his 4 augment, giving himself and the entire team a bunch of overguard while removing all of the armor from all of the enemies and freezing them solid, turns out is a really good list of things for one ability to do. And whenever defensive objectives come up, yeah, Snow Globe is still there to be good. And Freeze does have its augment with a solid offensive buff for you to build around, and even if you don't build around it, because it is fully separate, it is just kind of a pretty good value add as it currently stands, and that is the case with pretty much any weapon you use this with. Adding cold damage is pretty rarely bad in its current state, as it is, of course, crowd control and also critical stuff that you're getting from that status. So it's really a pretty good suite of buffs overall. And of course, usually in my build, I replace the completely useless 2. Ice Wave is nothing as an ability, literally 0 out of 10, with something else from the Helmet system. There's a number of different ways to go there, but just the general support that can be provided to a team, along with the debuffing, along with the crowd control, along with the buffing, because of course his 1 buff can also go on allies. It's a pretty good, versatile list of things that you could really bring Frost to pretty much whatever, with very few exceptions, and you're basically always going to have a pretty good time. Sticking with that train of thought, of course, a Warframe that did get quite buffed before, but did not need any grade movement, as she was already, and still, once again, unsurprisingly remains, at A+. Now, Gara, in her current state, is just an absolute demon. It used to be that you would use Mass Vitrify combined with Splinter Storm, combined with using Shattered Lash to break the Mass Vitrify to do really huge AoE damage through walls, and you would replace Spectral Rage unless you were using it for its cute little augment. And Splinter Storm can be put on you, it can be put on allies, it can be put on objectives, it can be put on enemies. It's a damage buff on enemies for you, and it is 90% DR for yourself and your allies, and it also has a healing augment that sometimes comes up. And there's a million things you can do, insanely versatile. Your Mass Vitrify is also just a wall to put around objectives, which adds to your ability to do any of those. It also, on enemies it passes over, is another damage amplification for you, and also a turn. It obviously glasses the enemies that it goes over, so they are also stunned. There's a bunch of things that you really wouldn't think would be the case that this does work on, and it's kind of just a laundry list of things that all does, backed up by current Shattered Lash, Influence Shattered Lash, being an absolute monster, where you swipe this thing through a map and kill everybody 10 floors up and 10 floors down, and everyone that you can see get hit by this just meets their maker right away. She is in an absolutely insane state, And just to mention it, I cannot believe her play rate is as low as it is with how incredibly strong she is now, and especially with how much of like a new player available the regular version of Gara is. Just a really insanely strong Warframe at the current time. I do like almost miss the slightly more complex like Vitrify, Splinter Storm, Shattered Lash, Infinite Damage, Splinter Storm combo that we used to do that was like more optimal. But you can still do it. It's just less optimal. So I guess I can't miss it that much if it's still around. Yeah, Gara is absolutely insane. She's good at just everything. Just everything. Let's do a little discuss about Garuda. So Garuda, I have actually moved down from last year's B+ down to just a B. Now, this is not much movement, but I think that it is in large part because of the types of content that we have been getting that I really feel like Garuda hasn't really been appropriate for. Obviously, Garuda has the ability to remain mostly invincible while she's casting her 4, and you can do her 1 plus her 4 combo to kill most things. And she has a very, very aggressively good energy economy with bloodletting, usually plus, any other healing that's not Blood Altar, as there's a lot of other healing available that is much more effective than Blood Altar, and this is usually the ability that you replace on Garuda. But she has like a good loop that works pretty decently well. It's really the defensive tools that I feel like generally fail Garuda a little bit, where being invincible while casting Seeking Talons, very nice, but it's only while casting. It's during the action of doing nothing, really, that you are invincible, and this does allow you to shield gate effectively. But I think there's a little bit of a fall off of like the want for a shield gating Warframe overall this year, who has to do it rather aggressively like Garuda does. And the Dread Mirror itself, the mirror part of the defensibility, or the defensiveness of this ability, just has never really sat right with me, or I think worked particularly well. So Garuda's definitely in an okay spot, like just fine, like doing good things. You can absolutely accomplish things with Garuda. And I like to use like her actual claws by unequipping a melee weapon. But I think that she's just a little bit on the weaker side than the evaluation I gave her last year. Though, of course, middle of B rank, hard to complain, I think. You know him, you love him. Let's talk about Gauss. Gauss, an incredibly, incredibly good Warframe that, much like last year, is getting docked for the exact same things. So he is an A-. Now, this is a thing that you'll see across a number of different A- Warframes, where they are really, really good, but have a couple conditions for doing their thing. And for Gauss, it's not too bad, but there is a lot of meter management of redline involved with playing Gauss. You, of course, need to basically always make sure that meter is completely topped off. You are mock rushing around, you are like just always casting, you are losing meter from kinetic plating, you're doing all these things with Gauss. And you're getting like the huge buffs out of Redline. You're mostly invincible for most of it while you're maxed out on kinetic plating and everything. You're quite fast with Mock Rush, just obviously rushing around. And of course, Thermal Sunder is an amazing ability where you get to use this, especially whenever you're maxed Redline, to just like restack heat tremendously to just do functionally infinite damage to groups of enemies if you are built for that. And there's a few different directions to take his kit overall, but the really heavy amount of meter management that he needs makes him a bit unsuited for certain types of missions. And those missions are usually the ones where, weird, I know, you kind of want to stand still. Standing still, not Gauss's strong suit. And I think that the downside of all of those missions being a bit on the like more annoying and weaker side and more just particular of what he doesn't really want to be doing, I think give him an overall just a little bit of a minus, but he's still a very, very good and strong Warframe that I know a tremendous amount of people enjoy quite a lot, and I get it. Now, speaking of a tremendous, we have Grendel. Grendel, I am moving up this year, just to get it out of the way right off the bat. I had him at a B+. I am moving him to the same rank as his best friend, A-. So, and this I will note, Grendel is one of my favorite Warframes. I like Grendel a lot, so there is, I think, almost certainly there's a little bit of bias here. I've been playing a ton of Grendel and seeing how he plays kind of across like everything in the game. And Grendel is very, very strong. And I think the thing that gives him the edge to move him up a little bit is that he is one of the best users of Persistence. Persistence helps him out quite a bit in a number of situations that would otherwise be really mucky for him. especially at much higher levels, because he has a tremendous amount of healing from his 2, and also constant healing from Pulverize if you are building into it, which makes it very, very easy to survive at really any level. And the higher level enemies get, Regurgitate scales based on the health of the enemies, which is going to make it pretty much always relevant, especially with its augment. So you can really do a lot here, with the big and only real downside being, as I've mentioned, the very common thing between the A-minuses is that you don't necessarily have a meter, but you do have a stomach to manage, and sometimes it can be tough to keep yourself full. Enemies at low level just die kind of the moment you eat them, and even at higher levels, you do such a good amount of damage to enemies that are in your stomach, it can be very difficult to keep yourself full, and you're often going to find yourself, if you're using a Regurgitate build, you're going to immediately have to spit the enemies out. Otherwise, they will simply die by you having eaten them, and you won't get to use them as ammo. This, of course, becomes less of a problem as you get to much higher levels, but those are, of course, much less relevant than the usual, like, maybe 500 to 1,000 you could reasonably expect in a slightly longer Steel Path mission. Or, of course, like your EDAs and your ETAs and the like. I will say, there's one other extra downside to Grendel that I really hope we get an augment for. That is, he can't eat enemies that have Overguard, or really do much of anything to enemies that specifically have Overguard. He's still intensely survivable, as he has that tremendous health pool to utilize, and he can just shoot the enemies that have Overguard if they're really a big problem and he can't eat enemies and shoot them at the enemies. But it is a thing that I do think is a little bit more negative. If I had to order them, I'd say Gauss is doing a little bit better than Grendel in the A- category. All right, let's talk about Gyre, so that a bunch of people can be unhappy with me, as is usually the case whenever we discuss Gyre. Gyre, I had at a C+, and I am maintaining that she is, unfortunately, at C+. I would really, really love to be able to place her higher, but Gyre is just an amalgamation of just necessary augments, it seems, that she kind of almost needs to function at a higher level, and it's really unfortunate to see. She has such a cohesive and I think well-designed kit, where like Cathode Grace and Rotor Swell, keeping those two abilities running and just zapping enemies and making your abilities crit, and throwing out Arc Spheres and Coil Horizons to like use those to either group enemies and then deal constant AoE damage with the Arc Sphere, and of course the contact damage, and all that such. And she has a real like designed game plan. Like the design here, both visually and mechanically, I think it's so good. And she does not have the numbers. She does not have the numbers to back it up. Defensively in her kit, there is little to nothing besides just hoping and praying on shield gates. And of course, she does have her new augment for the 75% DR. But why that augment is capped at 75% DR and not like at least 90 is totally beyond me. And besides that, there's just not enough damage output. You're usually having to either fall back on a really large damage buff like Roar and adding that into her kit, which doesn't really help her survivability options, or adding in an armor strip that is also a defensive ability like Pillage, in order to fix two problems at once with her. And I really think it is just a story of the numbers being too low on Gyre. Whenever she released, she would do like 1 million zaps of electricity per second from Rotor Swell, just like constantly zapping enemies, and that obviously was causing people to crash and needed to be fixed. But I really think that she needed some compensatory damage added to her in order to make it so that she can actually effectively kill enemies at higher levels with what she wants to do, which is crit with abilities. Combine that, though I will note Pablo has recently said this could change, with her being unable to take advantage to the final crit multipliers from Crepuscular and from Tenacious Bond, even though she is the crit with abilities Warframe that should want more than anything else to build into those crit damage modifiers. And it's just pretty unfortunate. I want buffs for Gyre. It is unfortunate that she is in this state. The design is so good, just make the numbers go up, please. Let's talk about the state of Harrow. Now, with the addition of Leon, who is a character that I very much like, that is the proto for Harrow, I would like to be able to say good things. Unfortunately, I am having to move Harrow from B, where I definitely overgraded him last year, down to, I think, a much more appropriate C+. So, unfortunately, we kind of have a bit to talk about with why Harrow is moving so much and just the relevance of his abilities in the current state of the game. So starting with his 4th ability, he can make everyone invincible for a little while, and just take no damage, and while they're taking damage, you can build up a big crit buff. Now, the being invincible part, you can't upkeep consistently because you have to go through the cooldown, and you have to have the crit buff end and everything in order to start doing that, and you can't just cycle invincibility forever, which of course would be amazing team support if you could, and a number of Warframes really do that for the team, as we talked about with Dante. The crit buff, while nice, is generally really not needed, and mostly just results in pretty colors on your screen rather than more effective damage output from the things that it affects. So, not amazing on either side, but a fine ability. Thurible has always been a very greedy ability. You charge this up, and then you are going to get energy for every kill that you get, and you're going to give that energy to the squad, and if you get headshots, you're going to get more energy, and your squad is going to get more energy. So, the game plan with this is that you're getting the kills, you're shooting the enemies in the head, and your teammates are getting tons of energy, with which they need to let you continue to get all the kills. Which is a game plan that's never really made much sense to me personally, and is a bit of a tough one, especially whenever you are in a squad with a good group of Warframes that are really able to clear a map. So it's a bit tough. Then we have Penance. So this is, of course, lifesteal, fire rate, and reload speed, all good things. And you can sacrifice shields to make this, much larger duration and everything like that, and it heals you and all that kind of stuff. So with that, Penance is a bit of a tough one because, honestly, the list of things that it gives you would be really, really good if it made any sense at all to use this with Persistence, but it really wants you to have a ton of shields, and so does Harrow's first ability with Condemn. So you Condemn, stun a bunch of enemies, sets them up for headshots and stuff. Great, gives you a ton of shields, and that's also, of course, very good for survivability. That's a great shield gating thing that Harrow's been doing for a long time. But like the lifesteal and all that stuff kind of goes to total waste. So you can usually just get like the fire rate and the reload speed benefits alongside casting Condemn a bunch. And then if you go into the Covenant Augment, you can get like a bunch of crit with that. So you can do gun stuff, but usually the things on Harrow devolve into I'm going to cast Condemn a lot and get shields back consistently. Because if you go even like the different like quirky ways to build him, which is like evade Harrow and such, usually even on that build and even more exemplified in that build, you need to get headshots. And if you have competent teammates, you're just going to be visible a lot of the time. And it's tough. It's tough. I don't think that Harrow provides a lot to a team, even though he is a support, and for what he's doing by himself, he's mostly shooting guns and getting shields, which is it works, but it's tough. Now, to sound like the biggest hypocrite ever, we're going to talk about shooting guns and getting shields. We're going to talk about Hildryn, who I'm moving up from A- to just A. Now, hear me out. We're getting shields and shooting guns in a pretty different way, in that we are using Hildryn's Aegis Storm 4 augment with her 1 to fire infinite exploding mega death through pretty much any map. This combined with the dog synergy to basically make that unlimited ammo and never end and keep you alive very well, especially alongside Fortifier to turn all of the Xmas into Overguard for you, means that Hildryn is insanely hard to put down unless levels have gotten to the higher end 4 digits most of the time. And then you, of course, combine that with Pillage still being something you can fall back on to remove all the armor on enemies and give yourself a bunch more shields as a nice reload if your dog happens to be down or whatnot. And you end up with a build that has a free spot, with Haven usually not being necessary, for buffing with a variety of different things, whether that's Roar, Nourish. I mean, you name it. There's any number of good helmets you could realistically add here. You could throw Eclipse in if you really wanted to. And just lots and lots of good choices for Hildryn, but mostly really coming into using her Aegis Storm setup with Balefire and just machine gunning down just insane amounts of damage into rooms is just really effective. It's good at pretty much everything, with very few exceptions, which mostly only occur at very, very high levels. And even then, there are plenty of ways to deal with those problems you might run into, should you want to. But yeah, very versatile. Getting shields and shooting guns can be good also. Let's talk about Hydroid. So a few months ago, I probably would have told you that I was going to move Hydroid's grade down and that maybe I had overestimated him a little bit with the A- I gave him on the last tier list. That being said, I think currently the space that Hydroid occupies at A- is actually entirely correct, especially with the different boosts and the really good utilization that he's getting from persistence. Being just totally invincible, covering the map in just debuff rain that gets rid of nullifiers and keeps you alive perpetually while having a very, very large damage buff and just like, just generally the ability to kind of do what you want and control the map really works very well. It's good at pretty much any game mode, where the struggles that you would have before would be that your survivability would come into question in a number of different spots. That really just doesn't happen much anymore. And while I do think that overall his output is a little on the lower side in terms of the direct damage of Tempest Barrage, and that goes back to the conversation that we had before with Citrine, where the enemies gained a lot more health and lost a lot of their armor. Tempest Barrage used to be good because it would get rid of all of the armor with the corrosion, and then just attack their health directly, and the damage of this did not go up when the enemy's health went up, so its direct damage performance is a little bit worse than you might want. But overall, the current state of Hydroid with his current build with like the persistence setup and everything is generally quite good. All the enemies are going to be viraled, no health, plus L, plus ratio, you know the rules, and you're just going to get to do what you want, apply whatever additional helmet you want to on top of that to kind of just get to whatever good stuff state you want to be in. And it's a very good experience overall with, I think, a couple little downsides here and there that give him that minus. Now, if there's any Warframe I expected to benefit from persistence, it was Inaros. And of course, benefit he did. We're taking Inaros from the B- of him just kind of, slowly falling out of favor with, just like got the rework, but like still mostly just like, health that didn't really work at higher levels because like you just don't have the shield gate. You just can't survive at those levels. Those problems go away. So he goes from B- to B+. I think this is entirely reasonable. You still do good stuff with Inaros. I still personally utilize his Sandstorm ability, which is very good at cleaning up a map. This can kill just like regular ad type enemies that are in the mission. And also, of course, group up a bunch of enemies and dump them, and also apply a bunch of statuses that are on your melee weapons if you need to like prime. And of course, much more importantly, you're going to have a tremendous amount of health. Then whenever you use Sandstorm, you're going to instantly heal back up to full. It is very common for an Inaros build with persistence to be functionally completely invincible for 15 to 20 seconds. And it is, you just don't really have to worry about it. As long as you are keeping Scarab Shell up, you're also totally immune to status and everything, and you can really just do what you want. Obviously, you get the choice, Scarab Swarm, keeping Scarab Swarm, or getting rid of Desiccation for kind of whatever helmet you want. I think there's good arguments actually either way with whichever one you'd like to keep. But just turns out being functionally completely invincible once again is pretty good, especially whenever you have a few bonuses to back that up. And your stuff is just available so easily and freely for what Inaros gets to accomplish. This is one, I'll be honest, I've had a bit of pushback on whenever I've done like the closed doors arguing with the content council about it. But I have decided to keep Ivara at just that middle B. I think that she perfectly exemplifies a Warframe that has a few things going against her, but she fills so many roles. She can do so many different things. There's really nothing that Ivara is particularly bad at, with her main downside being that she is slow at most things. So Prowl, this is just safe invisibility that lasts forever, that you don't have to re-up, that you like really barely need any energy for, that you cannot run and bullet jump and do all that stuff during. So that gives us our slow portion. And then, with that, you have the worst exalted weapon in the game. Unfortunately, Artemis Bow is just not particularly strong, but worst exalted weapon in the game is still all the exalted weapons, as long as you're not counting the Dewata. The Dewata doesn't count for this. That the melee on Titania, for everyone that forgot, that doesn't count for this. But Artemis Bow, other than that, it's good performance. It's just fine. If you have a bunch of bad primaries and secondaries in like ETA or EDA, Artemis Bow, more than serviceable, and can get you through pretty much whatever piece of content that you want to put it on, albeit, again, pretty slowly or with some difficulty. So it is like a good, just workhorse, exalted weapon that's not going to blow your socks off. And that's really what you want an exalted weapon to do. You really want it to be a top end of performance, incredible thing. But Artemis Bow just is not currently quite there. So, slow, invisible, okay, exalted weapon. How do we get to B ranking? It comes in the form of just being good at all that stuff. Just having sleep arrows, which can help you do your farms in all of the open worlds. Having like even the noise arrows to do the Samaris farm, though that's not the most efficient way anymore. Having cloak arrows, whenever that like will come up to cloak allies. Having the buff off of your dash wires and stuff to be able to really pump up that exalted weapon damage whenever you need to. Even like Navigator with like the Grimoire setup to have like the Death Orb setup with Ivara. Like there's these abilities just come up in ways that they will just happen to be totally solid for whatever you happen to be doing. Ivara is not going to have a particularly difficult time in like survival and like really the only thing that is ever going to be I really probably don't want to be Ivara here is going to be a defense mission where there's something that is going to draw attention that you need to protect. That's pretty much the only thing that Ivara is a bit on the weaker side for, and usually you can bring tools to really mitigate that too. So just the incredible versatility of Ivara and just being able to be used for just kind of anything with never really any problems unless your problem is going a little slower, which I think is more on the minor side. It's very similar to Ashe, but just if Ashe had a way larger tool set, but not the ability to spike for like 20 million damage. So I think overall, I like Ivara personally at B rank, but I do feel the need to more heavily justify it, I guess. We're talking about Jade, a Warframe that I like quite a bit. That being said, I think because I like her quite a bit, I overrated her just a smidge last time at A rank. A rank, I feel like, is just a touch too high, and I think that A- is much more appropriate for where Jade currently sits. I will say, I do think that that could change pretty significantly with augments that we're going to see for her, but she has a great kit. Obviously, being in A rank still, she is quite good. She has her Glory on High, which is, of course, a powerful exalted weapon for you to utilize. But this also is where I think the downside that is in her kit comes. You really want to be in Glory on High at all times. And there's a bunch of stuff that's just kind of not great to do in Glory on High. You're generally going to be a bit slower, so you are going to be not completing things as quickly. You can't pick up items for objectives while you're in your 4, and there's just like a kind of like a small laundry list of things that it's just like a little bit unfortunate that Glory on High just has like a little stack of unfortunates about it. It's still a very good ability, but that little list has definitely been a thing where I've been feeling that A was just a bit too high on Jade overall. Of course, it's still very high damage. You get that alternate fire explosion that can wipe out groups. It does incredible amounts of procs. Its base damage is still quite solid, though I will say its base damage is a smidge on the low side for what I might like. And her other abilities back it up very well, where you've got Ophanim Eyes, which is, of course, going to be stripping armor and slowing enemies and reviving allies and providing some of that support stuff. And then more support stuff with Symphony of Mercy. Unfortunately, we can only have one of these buffs at a time, but Power of the 7 being a nice power strength boost that is going to work on your 4, and then you swap that over to Deathbringer, which is a nice damage increase for you and your entire squad, is quite good. It is a weapon damage buff like a Serration, which is less than super ideal, but I still think it is quite good and one you're going to have on most of the time. But Spirit of Resilience is quite powerful. It's much better than I think most people rate it for keeping a team alive. As long as that team is utilizing shields, of course, it is quite a good survivable ability where if you are, suddenly having a little bit of trouble, if the team is kind of going down, you can swap to this and usually be rest assured that things are going to be all right. Then, of course, Light's Judgment. This, of course, has its heal and things on it and such like that, but usually what this is really for is you throw down Light's Judgment and then use like the alt fire with Glory on High in order to like blow up huge groups of enemies. That's what this is actually for. But it is, it is good in that role. It's a combination ability, not really something you're going to want to use by itself. I will say it's always been very difficult to decide what to subsume on Jade if you are going to, and I generally choose to not, which I think is a credit to how well this kit works. It's time to discuss Khora once again, and once again, you should already know what it is. Khora has been at A+, I can't remember when she wasn't, and she still is. Obviously, having not moved, Khora is absolutely incredible. Whipclaw is an unbelievable, incredible damage ability that, especially with its new access, well, relatively new at this point, access to influence, is amazing at just wiping out maps and just killing pretty much whatever happens to be in front of you and annoying you. There is a very short list of things that Whipclaw does not work on, and for those cases, they're small enough that you could just consider to not bring Khora to most of that stuff. But she is just really a workhorse where Whipclaw will just work on everything. This, of course, combines well with Ensnare. Ensnare on disruption targets that then get Whipclawed is pretty much just like easy peasy. Just do that for hours and hours, and it will just work and just obliterate those enemies. Great for that farm. And of course, like, Acolytes are vulnerable to this, like way more than what you'd think would be vulnerable to this is. And it's a big, kind of usually completely unnecessary damage boost that you can apply. Your third ability is Venari, but the really big plus to this is that Venari doesn't go away whenever you subsume over this ability, so it's kind of just a completely free subsume slot for whatever you happen to want. Usually in my case, that's going to be Nourish, which is also going to buff your your energy economy and such. But Venari, notably, is insanely strong. The number one thing about Venari is that Venari is very often going to be out of sight, out of mind, committing war crimes. That cat will do, unironically, like 50 kpm by herself if you let her, and combining that with Khora's incredible ability herself to just absolutely murder enemies, it is just, enemies are not left alive. Like, Venari is one of the reasons why in so many cases you can stop to do an objective as Khora and stop killing enemies. And of course, like, throw down like Strangledome usually whenever that's the case. But Venari will just take care of the problem for like 20 seconds if you need it. She'll just kill all the enemies when built appropriately. And it is, I think, not appreciated enough in Khora's kit that Venari is also just a crazy, crazy pet of her own accord. Like, on a number of other Warframes, if they could equip Venari, they would. So that is a big consideration. And of course, Strangledome, nice crowd control ability that can spread out the damage of your one and lock down areas. And that's going to be, nice to put a couple nets up. And of course, this is really big on a huge plus for Khora, which is using this with its augment to loot farm. This is like probably, I would say, the most effective overall single Warframe for getting more loot whenever you're just farming most of like your basic type resources. And is, of course, amazing for that as well. Khora is incredible. We been new. This is one where I feel like people are always telling me I have overrated and underrated Koumei, and it goes back and forth forever, which I think is a sign that I have exactly correctly rated Koumei at B-. Now, Koumei, not one to set the world on fire, but has a few things that do work and are interesting. Number one, Omamori. This is a reasonable survivability skill. It's going to give you a 50% chance to just not take damage and has a ton of charges, and whenever you don't take damage you instead get healed, and that works reasonably well as a just basic defensive ability, especially with the variety of ways that you can build, as her abilities don't scale particularly hard with any one stat that you really want to invest in. So Omamori kind of just functions as a decent survivability skill. Alongside that, Kumhimo, this can be built in some quirky, funny ways where you can like use Zephyrs 2 as a subsume to like pull enemies back and forth through this, but generally speaking, I'm not a fan of that, and this is the ability I replace in her kit. And then, of course, her 4, Bunraku, this can be combined with a couple of different helmets. You can use it with Roar as well in order to actually be a reasonably sufficient damage output ability that is also going to crowd control enemies, and of course prime them with a bunch of statuses if you want to use your condition overload type effects. And it is pretty good at that role, and it's actually not as energy intensive as you might think, as its like range is also quite nice. You don't have to build it up too much in order to get good effectiveness out of it, so you really aren't going to find yourself casting it all that much. The big controversial point, I think, usually comes in with Omikuji. This notably did get a bit better with its augment, where if you kind of build around it even more specifically, with particular weapons that are good at completing the different challenges, you can get through and get more of the buffs that are available in it more quickly. I think that some of the buffs that you can get here are good. And if you're going to go on a very long run and specifically try to get, like, you know, as many Koumei buffs as you're going to be able to get on like a longer run in survival or something like that, then you're probably going to have a solid time overall with Koumei because you're going in with a very concerted plan to get those things done. On the flip side, I think if you're on a like shorter mission, this ability kind of just never comes up ever, where, you know, any kind of like your more regular missions, even if you're doing a mission that like some people would consider longer, I wouldn't personally say it's longer, but just a straight up survival to 20 minutes, you're simply not going to get that many buffs. And the likelihood that you get, you know, half the buffs you get are kind of doing nothing for you is pretty up there. So on the lower side of B, but like a totally serviceable Warframe. Definitely some people think that I just think this Warframe is completely unusable trash, and I think that's clearly not the case. I just wish she was better. But yeah, nice B minus, totally workable, but with, you know, some clear downsides, some weird stuff, but sometimes that's what people are here for. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Kullervo might straight up be the most ridiculous Warframe in this game. I am moving him up from A to A+, and we can just go into the laundry list of reasons why that's the case. So persistence being added to Kullervo fixed like the one thing that could have ever possibly killed him, which is the tiny bit of vulnerability in his 2 augment constantly rotating around him and adding overguard and healing him to full. You could theoretically in the past be one shot during the little tiny window of vulnerability wherever your overguard was gone and a dagger had not yet given you more and healed you. If the enemy could deal all of your health through your armor in one shot, which would happen at super high levels. That no longer happens unless they can also, in that tiny window, apply a magnetic proc in specific to you. Which, let's face it, is simply not going to happen unless you let it, as Overguard is going to make you immune to those magnetic procs while it's up. So that is just a totally unlikely scenario. So for all intents, Kullervo is completely and totally invincible when built correctly. But even when not built correctly, even when built with sticks and twigs and just the most basic nothing things that were given to you in the tutorial of this game, Kullervo is a complete monster. Collective Curse chains a bunch of enemies together and just lets you quadratically scale just any weapon in the game on them. It just lets them all chain together, share damage. You deal damage to all of them. They all just multiply that damage up and just do an infinity billion damage. Do you want to turn that sniper rifle into an AoE weapon? Cool, Collective Curse can do that. Do you want to turn a ball of enemies that have been crowd controlled together into a fine mist? Cool, Collective Curse can do that with the Stug. An absolutely obscene ability that is just tremendously powerful and usually not even necessary. Not even necessary for you to cast because you are most normally going to be using Wrathful Advance with its insanely powerful melee critical chance build and instantaneous teleport to whatever you happen to be looking at to just mow enemies down with whatever melee weapon you in particular favor, usually one that has a pretty good, and that's even not required. You could have a pretty bad one and still get away with it with Wrathful Advance, heavy attack. And the ability that is usually subsumed off, Storm of Ukko, for any content that is beneath you, honestly, as Kullervo, you can just cast this, and even in low steel path, this'll just kill everyone. It's just raining daggers of slash procs that build combo, so that just like adds in with the melee plan as well, just while we're on our way. And it just usually it'll just kill even low steel path just outright. Put this around a defense objective, and you pretty much don't have to worry about it. It is an insane collection of abilities. Like the 2 augment that has been added to Kullervo, I could not have wished for in a realistic capacity. He is absolutely unbelievable, and I'm very much looking forward to his prime. I'm going to be totally frank with you. Whenever I was first making this tier list, I had put Lavos at B-, right where he had been last year. I had received a number of fairly impassioned arguments about various other Warframes being better than Lavos, and over the course of the deliberation, Lavos moved down to C+, which I think, given this total list, actually does make sense. And, of course, with the movement of where things are, which is the current tools and, like, you know, the different persistence being available and other just shifts that we have seen, I think that it is appropriate that Lavos moves down. I think that with not being able to really take advantage of those new tools for that, like, you know, of course, new invincibility style that a number of Warframes grabbed access to and kind of moved themselves up with, or kept themselves in higher tiers with, Lavos is not particularly good at that. Now, Lavos can, of course, heal inherently with Ophidian Bite, but I've talked about this a lot in the past, and that is that constant use of abilities in order to heal yourself is just shield gating in another color, and not something that persistence is particularly going to give you benefit whenever you use it. And of course, Lavos has always been bad at shield gating, as he doesn't spend energy to do things. He's cooldown based, which gives him a bit of a rougher time in the survivability department, just in general. Now, of course, he can still survive decently well, and it's fine, but overall, his abilities also have some struggles. Ophidian Bite, Vile Rush, Transmutation Probe usually do little to no damage, no matter what combination of abilities you use to infuse them with various different damage types, with the only thing that usually can kill some enemies being Catalyze, but also usually after you've primed all the enemies up, normally, of course, with the Sea-Doo, which is, of course, his signature weapon. But that all pales in comparison to his one augment wonder. He has his one passive augment that just lets you infuse and force proc whatever element you infuse into your last ability into all of your weapons. And usually, unfortunately, the correct play on Lavos is to pretty much ignore what your abilities are doing and just shoot guys with a gun. That is force procking the element with the buff you've chosen, and then subsume on usually a very strong damage buff like Roar, and go to town with shooting mans and not really use much of the Lavos part of Lavos, which I think is tough. I think it's unfortunate. Obviously, his abilities can be used to clear enemies, even at like regular Steel Path levels, but not super, super high without a very high degree of priming beyond that. And he's doing okay, but I definitely would like to see the numbers be better, especially associated with like how much you can like rotate his abilities and like force your cooldowns and actually deal damage with these first three abilities. Things would be a lot better for him if these abilities synergized much better with Catalyze coming online and being a more constant part of what Lavos is up to. But overall, not too much of an emotion for him. Now, Limbo, at this point, I don't even know if I need to say it. Limbo is the worst Warframe in the game. He's in D rank. That has not changed. I had considered putting him in F rank because he is the worst Warframe, but he still is totally fine at regular path stuff. Regular path stuff you can totally get away with. His like quirky stuff with his rift, it all works fine on regular path, and you're not going to run into like the million problems you'll run into in any kind of specialized content in higher level play. And it's all well and good and fine, and there's a couple things you can do that is worse versions of things other Warframes do that can kind of get you by. But overall, I want to take this time to not so much talk about how like Banish only comes up in unhealthy play patterns, or where like Stasis also like comes up whenever things are just like things that aren't immune to Stasis become immune to Stasis if it becomes a design problem for DE. Rift Surge is like quirky and like a funny damage buff stuff that is like just not good enough and like relies on enemies staying alive in order to maintain the damage buff, or be having a lot of enemies alive rather. And Cataclysm, like this is an ability that like, yeah, you can defend targets with it, but that's like mostly the long and the short of it, besides being able to break boxes with it, which of course Limbo does worse than Zaku, who has a lot of other things going for them. So overall, it's a mishmash of abilities that like the way that I usually talk about this is that Limbo, if Limbo is good at something, it usually means one of two things. Either DE made a mistake and allowed Limbo to work, or the thing DE has made is bad. So if Limbo works to do his thing of, oh yeah, I press Cataclysm on whatever the objective is, and then I turn on Stasis, and that completes the mission, it usually means that that mission fucking sucks. So, like, really, Limbo is the canary in the coal mine for the new mission is trash. And that is a role, to be certain, but not one I could associate at a higher than a D rank, I think. I also will say, because I've talked about this with all the D rankers, I think that for Limbo, it is most unlikely for him to get a rework, as the amount of work that would need to go into a rework for Limbo to change the things about him that make him that canary in the coal mine, I think would instead be better served going towards a brand new Warframe instead. We need a better Warframe whose name starts with L. Let's talk about Loki. Loki has not changed from last year to this year. I have kept him at just a C rank. Turns out, going invisible has a baseline amount of functionality. Just being invisible and being quite fast with your little, like, you know, decoy plus switch teleport setup to get around from places, as well as just being pretty quick, has a basic amount of functionality that I think really exemplifies just what just C rank is. You basically function, it like works on like pretty much whatever, with like some like caveats here and there, but like there's just not much else for Loki to be doing. You're not doing a whole lot. There's like the quirky decoy builds with like the augment for the status and stuff, and that's like a little funny, but it's mostly wasted effort that just like kind of doesn't like amount to much. It's like you could get the same, you'd actually just always get less pretty much doing like the funny decoy setups that are available than you'd get from just shooting a gun at guys. And I don't even think that I really even warrants a mention that currently Radial Disarm radially does just about nothing, as you're already invisible, and pretending that we're protecting our allies by removing their guns in 2026, I think is just a fool's errand, really. There's also notably some like funny stuff you can do with the augment for switch teleport to have like invincibility that you're just like re-upping by switch teleporting, and that's like cute, but like you're already invincible via the invisibility the vast majority of the time. So like even though that build is like available, I think it's more funny than good. So overall, like, you know, Loki is, hey, I'm pretty quick, and hey, I'm invisible, so I kind of just get to do what I want. I think that's like fine for C rank. I think that's about right. You get to subsume whatever and do whatever you want with all that stuff. It's very open and free. Invisibility is very long. You don't have to build a much duration. It's really a whole laundry list of like, yeah, it's fine. Finally, another starter. As I mentioned earlier, all the starters are still at A- for this list. And Mag, I think, is my favorite of the three starters. I think she has a very strong start, with Pull being very, very good early game in order to just like group enemies up and melee them down, which is going to be very powerful for new players. Magnetize, much less useful early, much better later. Combining Magnetize with Breach Surge as a subsume lets you just just nuke enemies for like 30 million damage and just do goofy stuff. Magnetize is also an AoE that is like you can survive inside of. Enemies can't really shoot you while you're at the edges of it the vast majority of the time, but mostly you are just trying to set up the bomb to just blow up tile sets worth of enemies that are going to be in the radius of Magnetize, which works quite well. Polarize, probably the worst ability on Mag overall, just not super effectual. It does like fine sometimes lower levels, like if you're on like the new player track, you can kill some enemies with this, but usually all the stuff that Polarize could in theory do is instead done by Crush and its augment, where this is going to remove all of the defenses off of enemies, get rid of all of that nasty armor, and also of course give yourself a ton of shields and stun enemies. And it's just a very good, just generically applicable ability that's going to do a whole lot of things for you. And with Breach Surge instead of the Polarize on here, very often Magnetize, Breach Surge, Crush is just going to eliminate really anything that's vulnerable to it. And you combine that with a number of bosses and such also still being vulnerable to Magnetize, and not really being able to do much about it. Lots of special enemies are actually still vulnerable to this, and they kind of just die to it because the damage output of it is tremendous on a target that does not instantaneously fold to it being put on them, which is really what usually happens and then it just gets to build its damage much more slowly. But yeah, good stuff for Mag all around. I do think it is a definite weakness of her kit that I think that a lot of the good stuff about what she's up to does revolve around being able to subsume Breach Surge. That is a bit of a tough one. I do really wish we could see Polarize be buffed up to be at least somewhat comparable in that aspect. But I don't know that that'll exactly happen. Obviously, she's still doing quite well. She's an A-. Another that almost needs no introduction whatsoever, Mesa, the long-standing A+, of course, remains at A+. I mean, just the list here. Obviously, starting her first ability, Ballistic Battery, I'll be the first to say, this ability does nothing. It's a total replace, get something else in this slot from Helminth. But even if you don't replace this ability, she's got 3 other amazing abilities. Shooting Gallery, a slightly defensive ability that's also going to give you a basic damage boost. Her Shatter Shield, which is a huge amount of damage reduction. Granted, only on projectiles, but that's usually the only thing that's ever going to be able to reach you. So for just general safety, you're going to have Shatter Shield on pretty much at all times. And then, of course, the Peacemaker. Peacemaker, you whip out the regulators, and you just murder everything. It has like wide auto aim to start that focuses in and starts doing even more damage should an enemy start living through it. And this, especially with Fortifier on it, means that any Xmas that you shoot with this, you're just going to steal their Overguard for some more consistent survivability. It's going to apply a million statuses to them. It's going to continue to do more damage as you get more focus, and it's just gonna work. It just fills everyone with bullets and they all die. And really, what more could you ask for from the gunslinger herself? Super survivable, like just good generic buffs, an open slot for a number of good helmets that could be included here, and then an ability that just mops the floor with everything you can see. Now, in quite similar news, let's talk about Mirage. So, Mirage has also stayed at A+. Now, Mirage is actually quite similar to Mesa. You've got an ability that is a damage buff, though, to be fair, I think much more significant one with the multiplication of both melee and guns. And this also is a bit defensive in that enemies will shoot at the clones instead of yourself. And then we also get Eclipse, which is one of 2 things. It's either a very, very consistent and powerful damage increase, or it is a very solid damage reduction. Either way, whatever you happen to need in a situation, it can be for you now, as it's disjointed from the lighting system. So if you want to be hugely survivable, turn on the Eclipse in the dark side. And then if you want to do a massive amount of damage because you need to, turn on the light side. And then with our 4th ability, Prism, we get to just throw the disco ball, and any not extremely high level enemy, if there's any amount of enemy density as this scales per the enemies that it is hitting, it just lasers down every enemy in a enormous radius. I will say there have been recently some bugs with this ability where it has just phased through walls and despawned, and that's a bit unfortunate, but not something that I'm going to be holding against this ability, as that's a clear bug and not supposed to happen. The other thing I will say is that sleight of hand builds do come up with the augment. You can use this in like ESO and stuff in order to like wipe out maps of like lower level enemies. Not something that I'm particularly a huge fan of. I would much rather use her for that kind of stuff. So for me, sleight of hand ends up being a really great subsume slot that can be any number of powerful effects, except for the ones, of course, that overlap with Eclipse. Any of those power abilities like Roar can't be combined together, so you do have to be a little bit more selective. But many things like Noko's Shrooms and Nourish and such like that, especially the energy economy stuff, is very, very compelling for Mirage. And yeah, unsurprising A+, I think. All right, last year I dunked Nekros all the way down to D tier because D just don't let him work on stuff anymore, and or it's just not valuable to bring him to the few things that he does work on. This has remained totally true this year. He is still pretty much just not allowed to work on anything, and like if you are going to bring him to some kind of farm that he works on, generally he needs a chauffeur. You are very, very normally going to be experiencing that some other better Warframe is bringing you the Nekros to a mission, or you are finding a Nekros to bring to a mission so you can do the mission while getting more loot that Nekros can theoretically give you. from like a lot of just like basic enemies, because that's pretty much all his 3 works on anymore. Yes, there are technically Shield of Shadows builds that have like some survivability to them. You can even like just like build Gloom and go Persistence and do stuff there with like some shard investment and things in order to get it going. And that technically works, but you're still just Desecrate botting and just really forcing it. Soul Punch is a nothing ability that does pretty much nothing. And Terrify is a pretty inconvenient armor reduction skill. Overall, like, you're a Desecrate bot. D for Desecrate bot. This Warframe will sometimes be brought to a thing, but the thing that they are doing there is like being protected while they have Desecrate happen. And in any case where you're like solo using this Warframe, pretty much always you should just be Khora instead. Let's talk about Nezha. So I will say that it cut it kind of close, but I do think that Nezha maintains the A+ ranking this year. I do think that the Temple build, where you use Temple Subsume with Nezha, is quite powerful, and the Nezha still has a number of other benefits, with very incredible survivability with Warding Halo, still the damage debuff on Blazing Chakram, and of course the 4+ Temples 1 combination, being able to really obliterate large groups of enemies, and that generally working across pretty much everything that you're going to be doing. I think that stuff still works very, very well. Of course, that is all with Nezha's 4 augment. And I think it works incredibly well. I do think that if any Warframe in the A+ category is the bottom of A+, it probably is Nezha. But I think it's not quite time yet to say that Nezha moves down to just A. And of course, at some point, we're splitting hairs there a bit. So yeah, I think that's, not a huge amount to say here. Not a ton has really shifted, of course, since the last time we talked about Nezha, which was his builds video. So good stuff overall, but I just wanted to note there that I do think that, maybe a lower A+ than a lot of the others. We're going to have a conversation that a lot of people don't want to have. So I previously had Nidus at B-, and much like Harrow, I overestimated what Nidus was really even capable to do at the time. And really the advent of Persistence and the Warframes that it was applicable to, and further like testing with like trying to get that stuff working on Nidus, really showcased that I think it is unfortunately very, very reasonable to move Nidus all the way down to C-. And this is for a number of reasons. Obviously, in terms of the design of the kit, I think that the building stacks with Virulence and like Larva, grouping enemies together, hitting Virulence on them, putting a Parasitic Link on an enemy, and like duplicating up your Virulence and like creating areas of Ravenous, I think all that stuff is really, really cool. I think it is awesome. The themes are there. It feels cool to do. But the output is just nothing. The just pitiful numbers across really the whole thing, except for, I guess, the DR of Parasitic Link, which with, of course, Persistence becomes kind of negligible at best, is just really tough, especially whenever we are kind of at like the low point for grouping in general. Grouping skills are not particularly amazing right now. A lot of the enemies that you would really want to group are going to have Overguard, so while you can kill like a lot of trash mobs, having the like 1-2 status of like group the enemies and then kill them for trash enemies, that has actually gotten to be kind of a slow thing to do to clear them out with the current power we have in game. And unfortunately, without like the augment and like full stacks and a huge amount of time investment, Virulence just really does not do damage. I mean, even that is a really, overestimation of what this thing is really capable of. In general, I think it's tough. Like, Parasitic Link has Parasitic Vitality, which unfortunately takes the place of Umbral Vitality and can't be used alongside it for getting to truly obscene amounts of health very easily. You can get to high amounts of health that allow you to do Persistence plus Grace while you're tethered, but like being a dog on the leash with Parasitic Link is not exactly the best experience or like really a great strategy overall. It's tough out here for Nidus. I really think that they could do a pass and not change the gameplay really of Nidus at all, but just boost the numbers of everything that he does. and you could have a good Warframe, because the design is so good still here, and I think that that's reflected in how many people do really still love Nidus. But the output of what you're actually getting is just kind of nothing. He's like an all health based Warframe that just like, I mean, his base healing is so low. This is obviously the like rank 0 variant of it, but it's not even anywhere close to what it needs to be to keep you alive reasonably. At really almost any level of play besides regular path. It's tough out here for Nidus. It's now time for our third 5-letter Warframe that starts with N. That's Noko. He is brand new this year, and I am placing him at A+. This was my original instinct, because I am a huge fan of Noko, to put him at A+. But I was actually going to have him just at A, out of like some caution and stuff, but I was very handily convinced by those in the content council that like it just makes sense. He's so unbelievably powerful, and I will say I do tend to agree. This could be one of those things where the new shiny has been overrated, but Noko really kind of does have it all going on. Bright Bonnet for infinite energy, a big amount of strength output. Both of those things go to your whole team, and you can just jump on this to activate it at any time, and it combines with your 4th ability for like constant pulses whenever your 4 is on it, combined with Stinkbrain's ability to not only apply viral to the enemies that are in the AoE, but also to put those enemies to sleep. So this is an effective amount of crowd control, should you even realistically need that for defending objectives and such. This has come up a lot actually in EDA and ETA whenever I have rolled Noko, and been very good. So his 2 mushrooms, great utility, great team support, really positive things to say there. Those, of course, combine very well with Spore Spring. Spore Spring, you throw out your mushroom and it starts bouncing. Every time it bounces, it gains an absolutely massive amount of damage, and its crit chance goes up. So this just will commonly do millions of damage in a very solid AoE once you're built around range. That is just going to eliminate enemies down hallways, and just like the number one thing to do with this is to, because you can have 3 of them active at a time, throw one of them down a hallway and look away and just be like, it'll take care of it. Spore Spring will handle it. This projectile is smart. It will specifically target enemies. You don't have to really rely on like the RNG of it. It kind of just solves problems. And it also auto targets your actual like emplaced mushrooms to activate those as well. And you combine all this with an incredible passive where if you die and you have mushrooms out, and you should, you just walk up to a mushroom and get right back up. Just don't die instead. You are an extant form of life that cannot be killed in a way that matters, and that's quite good. And speaking of that, a oft subsumed over ability, Reroute, allows you to just turn into a little guy. Be untargetable, invincible, just get health and shields regenerated while you're a little dude. You can toss out like 3 Spore Springs, just turn into a little guy and just dance on them. And it just really, there's not anything that enemies can really do about it. And it's really worth noting that Spore Spring currently kind of works on just about everything, with very, very limited exceptions. Even bosses where you would normally expect it to not function, like the Murmur boss. The Murmur boss will just get dunked on by this and just get exploded, and you'll just be dancing around as a little small mushroom man, and there's nothing they can do to stop you whenever you get up from your passive. I mean, in EDA and ETA, like, you can theoretically die if you just die over and over and over, but if you're dropping your mushrooms whenever you come out of your regrow and then turning into reroute, I mean, this commonly is like 15 seconds of just being like, what are you going to do about it? I'm a small man. And it's insanely powerful. It works on like everything. It's very, very compelling and strong. And also, hey, this is an ability that crits, that benefits from those final crit damage multipliers we talked about with Gyre. Hey, what's up with that? Let's talk Nova. I'm not going to keep you too long on this one. I think all of us know that Nova is so good. She was an A+ on my last, and she is an A+ on this one as well. After her rework, just inarguable. She is absolutely incredible. Whether she is doing a damage output build with Null Star, you can do damage output builds with Antimatter Drop, though granted, Antimatter Drop does have a point where it begins to fall off, though that I think is quite high for it, but it's usually an ability that is oft replaced. Super speed with Wormhole, being able to speedrun missions very effectively with Wormhole. And of course, like do all kinds of things like the planes missions. You can send the drone through the portal here, do objectives with this ability. Great stuff there. Speaking of objectives, we have Molecular Prime. Either speed up the enemies tremendously to get them to your defense objective or just wherever you need them to be murdered at more effectively, or slow them all down and really lower the threat of an entire mission very, very easily. And thing I didn't even mention, of course, Nullstar gives you a bunch of DR as well. It's just a whole list of just fantastic effects that are good in just basically every single situation. And because you can be Spiva as well as Slova at the same time now, it's just a great situation. Nova's in an amazing place. She's really just good at everything, with the only like conceivable downside being that you usually do want to like have access to a good gun, which can sometimes be in contention in the random loadout style missions. But with the huge damage boost you get from Molecular Prime, it's usually really not a problem. Nyx. Now, Nyx is one that improved a lot with her rework as well. And I have had her at A in the past. And though I am a little on the edge about it, I do think that staying at A is probably correct for her, as she does have a few things going against her, mainly in that very often she can perform very slowly the jobs of other slightly higher ranked Warframes. In general, you have a lot of access to different game plans. You, with your augment, have Absorb, which just makes you straight up invincible. Really big benefit to this, it also makes companions invincible, which allows you to do safe companion DPS builds, which do really a lot of damage whenever you just know that they will never die, and can let them cascade off Contagious Bond for just like literally damage cap, and can just go off and go crazy. You also, inside those builds, usually have a subsume slot for buffing those companions, so those crazy things happen much, much more consistently, which I think is a big boon for just the more passive way that Nyx can be played, and is much better, unfortunately, than her mind control, where this does, of course, have a build around that you can do with Mind Freak and everything, where you can take control of an enemy and shoot them a bunch and give them a big damage multiplier and make them, you know, in some cases, if you stack heat correctly, you can make them like just do damage cap, and you get a guy with a machine gun and he mows all the other enemies down. And that's like cute and quirky, but generally speaking, going a more consistent companion plan is usually, I think, a bit better. So this ability usually gets subsumed over, but it is worth noting there are like game plans that do actually function with this, which is unusual for an ability that utilizes enemy damage. With that, we also have Psychic Bolts. This is just going to allow you to steal shields, armor, Overguard, of course, being the big one that you can steal with this, and just reduce the damage or reduce the defenses of all of the enemies that are hit with this, and then it will just chain 2 more enemies after you murder them, which makes this a great ability to toss into a crowd and just be rest assured that you just shoot the enemies that don't have defenses anymore and they just die. This ability is extremely quick to cast, extremely effective, and because it gives you the Overguard, it actually allows you to pretty often just turn off Absorb and quickly go through a mission if you're knowing you're going to run into a bunch of overguarded enemies, because you can Overguard plus Shield Gate very easily with this ability, and it's quite a good advantage. Combine that with Chaos, which, while not normally amazing when you're defending objectives, making it so the enemies aren't shooting the objective, is a pretty good ability. So for missions that are like, you know, interception, in your defense type missions, of course, it's just generally pretty useful. And of course, this combines with her passive, because it gives the enemies a bunch of radiation procs, to just very simply give us a bunch of critical chance for our primary and secondary weapons, which is just like, I mean, 200% critical chance is quite a big boon. So it's kind of a free damage multiplier that we're getting just because we're throwing chaos out there every once in a while. Turns out pretty good. That also combines, you can just do some funny things with the damage multiplier of mind control by chaosing them first. All kinds of good stuff there. Just generally very, very much can do kind of whatever. A little bit of that, like the slowness is the part that really gives me pause, but you are very much like kind of a female revenant in a lot of cases. Oberon. So Oberon was previously in D rank, and he did get a rework. Unfortunately, I don't think it was quite what he was looking for, and his rank has increased less than I would have liked, to C+. The new setup for what Oberon can accomplish, and that's including like the tools where you can do persistence things and all that, is in a place where the numbers just still don't feel very good. I would really love to be able to say that you can like build around smite and just like smite enemies with like big damage multipliers and like kill groups of enemies that are in like single rooms and like, kill like, packs of, 5 to 10 enemies that are like tightly put together. And like maybe you could build around a grouping ability even to maybe start killing more because its range is like not very good. But the way that the damage output is here, very often what you need to do is you need to have like Reckoning come down first and like completely reduce the enemy's armor to nothing, and then like plus they need to already have radiation on them, plus you need orange shards to separately multiply ability damage, plus you need to subsume roar, and just an insane laundry list of things to make smite do something that it's just not particularly worth it. You can make it work, but even then on like harder targets, like it's not particularly effective in disruption. It needs like what seems like even more setup there. Hollowed ground like is okay. It's nice that it's a full 360 now. And like you do want to put that radiation on enemies, of course, right? And then renewal is a buff. Like the health per second from this, especially with persistence being added, is really not what you'd like to see in general. The armor add does make it easier to get to that point, to turn all that stuff on. But it's just, it overall really just like, you have some okay defensive stuff. You're not really providing much to your team, and like your offensive things are just much, much worse than even like some basic melee weapon options that you have access to, which is, I think, very disappointing to see. I was really hoping for better numbers out of Smite in particular. You can get away with just like doing like multi-reckoning, but like the energy like needs of a build like that are also just like generally kind of frustrating, and pretty low output besides. So yeah, pretty it's definitely an improvement for Oberon overall. But yeah, the number situation here feels old. Let's talk about Octavia. So Octavia is a classically incredibly powerful Warframe that gets to do a lot and has a really big toolbox, and not a thing has really changed for Octavia. However, I am moving her from A plus to just A, and the reasoning for that is really just that she is just kind of slow at this point. Like, she has such good things to be doing, with Mallet obviously scaling based on incoming damage from enemies, and affecting like a very large radius, especially whenever it's affected by amp. And of course, like if you wanted it to be carried around by Resonator, that's something that you can do. And of course, Metronome is providing a bunch of buffs and invisibility to yourself and also your team if they play along, along with like the big base damage bonus you're going to get from amp, so you can use guns while invisible and just do great things all the way around. But I think in terms of like the general plan, which for the longest time has been throw Mallet and then Mallet solves the problem, it has really gotten to solving that problem so much slower than it really used to. And I think some of that is maybe potentially there is a bug in there somewhere with enemies not targeting Mallet appropriately, or some such like that. But in my testing, it just was a little bit lackluster compared to how it has been in the past. So just a small bump down for Octavia. I will say there was not really much recognition whenever we did the like behind the scenes discussion about like where all of the frames are. I had moved Octavia down like before presenting it to the content council for like a big argument. And I really expected there to be some Octavia pushback, but received none, which even that was a bit surprising. I think that people are maybe just generally, like, you can see like the play rate kind of continuing to go down on Octavia, and even though she's so strong, there's so many so strong things that we can be doing. Speaking of so strong, we have another addition to the A category with Araxia coming in at just A minus. This is because, of course, she is new. She's new to the list. I do try and be cautious. I do think that A minus is appropriate for where Araxia is. I do very much like the current persistence build that I do have her on, but I have a couple misgivings here and there. Those mostly revolve around the state of the Widow's Brood. So Widow's Brood, these summons are based on the starting level of missions that you enter, which is a bit tough. It effectively means that they don't scale beyond the base of a mission, as you might expect from the words I used before. And that means that they suffer a lot in any kind of like longer form content, like if you're going to do cascade runs and things like that, and they just can't really keep up if the level of a mission is going to go up. And that even happens in like EDA, ETA, though granted usually they're spawning at a much higher starting level, which can help out a bit. So Widow's Brood is kind of on the back foot as a thing to build around. I think it's a big part of her kit that has a little bit of a tough wrinkle to it that you kind of have to force through if you want it to work in general. Besides that, though, she has her 4, which is a gigantic health boost, and it is a huge buff to a lot of weapons. Not all weapons, because the way that this buff is applied is the same way that Sight's buff is applied, and unfortunately for pretty much all of the strongest weapons in the game, those of course being the Incarnans, it means that this buff doesn't work on those, which I think is another bit of an unfortunate piece of just a generally working buff that in most other cases, because it's not like an ammo packs thing like it is with Sight, you would assume would just work, like we get with Saren's 3 and like the 1 augments of even like Oberon and such. All that stuff all works, and it's a bit odd that this one doesn't, I think, still. So that is an odd case, but it is a huge boost in health, which gives her the ability, with a little bit of finagling, to use a persistence build that is incredibly powerful, as this effect also is inbuilt healing, where you can turn it off and turn it back on and instantly heal right back up to full, giving you a large amount of functional complete invulnerability. That is incredibly powerful. And while you are in this ability, you are status immune, so you don't have to worry about any of those pesky magnetic or heat procs turning it off for you, which just gives you huge power. And of course, you can see in the preview ability here, just being able to press space to zip across the map is incredibly good as well. And then that is combining with Webbed Embrace, which is a separate damage vulnerability multiplier that is very nice as a little bit of an additional power increase that does work on the vast majority of things. And these AoE webs are going to just hold enemies in place, which is great for defending objectives and doing just like, kind of any real variety of things you need to do with the various, little challenges you might come across. Take this into like an EDA that has a mirror defense on it, and that's like, oh yeah, I can just throw my webs down and the enemies can't come in, and all those little effects that you get from just like a good ability that is good offensively and also defensively. Then finally, Mercy's Kiss, which is a good option that I do personally usually choose to subsume off, but a great way to generate both health and energy orbs. So just good resourcing as a baseline here, though for me personally, doing the Hunter Adrenaline persistent setup has worked out very well. But I think that she just performs just a little bit worse. She's got like a couple of caveats and stuff. I want to be a little bit cautious. I think that I would be totally on board. Like if somebody told me that they thought that Orexia should maybe be at just A, I think that's also fairly reasonable, but just a little bit lower because I think there's a little bit of caution there. I do definitely think that she could go very crazy with future augments, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what that might hold. Let's talk about Protea once again. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. She's, of course, still at an A+. Protea, absolutely fantastic. One of the best supports and just generally Warframes in the game. Absolutely incredibly powerful. She is down an ability with Temporal Anchor generally being pretty much completely useless, and usually it being best to cancel this ability early. But that matters not, because she has bonus abilities in the form of her first ability actually being 2 very good abilities. So she has her Shrapnel Vortex, which of course is going to deal a bunch of slash damage and really just eliminate a lot of weaker enemies. Granted, that does fall off at higher levels in the Steel Path, unfortunately, and is of course one of the victims of they lowered armor and increased health things. So it's a little bit worse than it was in the past there. But shield satellites are absolutely crazy for you and your whole squad, as long as anyone is using shields, of course. This will apply to yourself, companions, and any ally with shields to give them constantly regenerating shields that also elongates their shield gate. Very powerful effect that's going to keep you safe in pretty much every given scenario. And then for those pesky higher level encounters, Blaze Artillery has a insane damage per hit multiplier, where every enemy that it hits on every single shot, it's going to gain that much damage. It is heat damage. It does always proc heat. It works with Archon Vitality. It just does insanely huge heat procs. Firing it into groups is just absolutely ridiculous. And you can have multiple of these up at once, which is just stellar for it to blow through high-level enemies as well very easily. And then, of course, perfect economy. Why not? dispensary for health and energy orbs, and if you want to do like cool arc gun synergies, which are much more relevant now with the benefits of the arc guns being buffed very considerably. This also gives those unlimited ammo, so dispensary is fantastic for that. And of course, Temporal Anchor does actually have some augment stuff you can do with it now to like keep a constant blaze artillery active, though it does unfortunately cap it out. But it's a thing that at like mid steel path, like lower levels, is really good for just like very casually going through. Thing I will say about Temporal Anchor that I would love to see as a change for this ability, I would love to see you not go back in time at the end of this and for it to just stay on until you either die or hit the button to go back in time yourself. Having this be like a ability that's more like Dagath's 3, I think would make this ability actually probably really good overall. And that's something that I'd like to maybe see explored, but I think with Protea being as good as she is, the likelihood that she's going to get any buffs seems quite low. Y'all want to talk about concrete? Let's talk about Corvex. So Corvex, I last put him at just a B, and I am going to move him down to a B-. Now, the reason for moving him down to a B- is mostly because he is just so non-versatile. Very, very unique build utilizing the 4 augment to have like the pillars turn into effectively copies of the 4 augment and lock down areas that you're currently not in and be able to kill enemies that are like spawning in and all that stuff. And like you're invincible during Crucible Blast and you can manage the energy and do all that stuff. And it's very unique and interesting, and I like playing that build, and I think it's really non-versatile. In any mission where you need to like do objectives or like need to even, I mean, you know, like capture a target, like do even a mobile defense, it's like a little bit awkward to like not be doing your game plan so much of the time. And even within that, very often, like on single targets, especially ones that have overguard, Crucible Blast can't really just like use your giant, insane nuclear chest laser to kill one guy. It really needs to be fighting groups. So if you get like one Xmas who's like just kind of by himself, he can often just kind of hang out with you and you'll be kind of paralyzed unless your companion can take care of them. And the non-versatility of like the situation specifically needs you to be overwhelmed by hordes of enemies that are constantly spawning and your objective needs to be killing them in order to really get a whole lot out of what Corvex is offering, with like the non-versatility also of Disymmetric Guard not having like a heal contained within this ability, or even like DR, it's just like status resistance stuff, is really unfortunate. But in like Containment Wall, obviously this is like a single line effect that does have a damage vulnerability and all that stuff, but it's just not a very effective ability in terms of like the way it gets cast. You're looking at a bunch of enemies that are already effectively grouped up for what Corvex does, and then using the walls to not really group them up any more than that. And it's a tough sell overall. Like the game plan works, but it's in a rough way. It's definitely unique and can function, but it's got there's a lot of holes in the plan there. I definitely have considered moving him down even further, and it's potential that is correct. But I think that the B- is probably where I want to be for right now. But yeah, it definitely has been very weird in the versatility. You can go like a persistence build, but I don't think he's particularly good at pivoting to that, while also still maintaining the stuff that he can do with his pillars plus his Crucible. Revenant. Let's talk about the saddest story you'll ever hear. He's no longer at S rank. He's only at A+. Obviously, Revenant still intensely strong. I do think with the pivots and the new stuff that we have seen being added to like just what the tools are available to us and just the kind of meta overall, and the strength of other Warframes, I do not think there is any longer such a big gap between Revenant and what a lot of other Warframes are able to offer. Revenant, obviously still very powerful. He has, of course, like his like 1+ Reeve, which is just an instant kill for enemies. Mesmer Skin makes you and your allies all invincible. More commonly, they already are. And of course, Dance has a full build around with like the Noko shrooms that have been added that I showed off recently that allows him to do just good DPS output that is going to scale based on the damage that you're intaking, which effectively turns you into an Octavia Mallet. So he has good stuff kind of all across his kit that is usually kind of sacrificed for in order to just like only build around Mesmer Skin and like have a big buff in the 4th slot so you can use Precision Intensify. And that build also works just fine because you still get access to like your 1 plus your 3, and if your 4 has Roar on it, you can still just instant kill enemies, and it's all these things just work, and they all work while you are totally immune to damage and status and everything else. And that stuff's really, really good. But a bunch more Warframes now have access to similar functionality and their own advantages, such as Kullervo. So things are much closer now, and I don't think that Revenant is probably in any real danger of being nerfed this year. At least I hope not, with a bunch of other Warframes being able to mimic what he's done. And, of course, his play rate decreasing quite considerably, though, of course, he's still in the top 5 quite handily. Rhino's back. So this is one where I actually think that last year I was too hard on Rhino. I think I went easy in a number of different spots, as we've already talked about, but I think that I was too hardline on like Rhino getting worse in like the function of like other Warframes having access to Roar and stuff and those types of things. I think that Rhino's overall versatility and just the different ways that he can be built and like the power with which he just kind of always maintains, he actually definitely deserves to be at that A- ranking up from B+. I think that this is definitely appropriate. I mean, at a baseline, which is like basic energy regeneration stuff that we have access to now, you can just turn Iron Skin back on. Even if you don't even invest in this skill, you can just turn this back on for essentially just double gating Overguard into shields. And that is true invincibility at most levels of play. You can also just, of course, like build around this and make this number like hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Iron Skin that enemies have a like near on impossible ability to get through. Combine that, of course, with like, I mean, it's a solid crowd control ability for Rhino Stomp, more minor, but you combine it mainly with Roar at full power for just an absolutely insane amount of damage output. And pretty much whatever you want to make Rhino do, he will do, and he will do it well, whether that is like going for a like Null Star setup where you're doing like Null Star plus Roar with Null Star's Augment, and like then you're using like Arcane Arachne for a base damage multiplier there and like just doing goofy things there. You can do all of that goofy stuff and still maintain being invincible with Iron Skin at a baseline, which I think the versatility and like just all the different things that you get to do really come together. I think that I was too hard on Rhino, and he definitely should have remained in A+ last year, or not A+, in A category, A- now, last year. And I think that he's in like a very solid overall place. Granted, giving out Roar to everyone definitely does affect the grade overall, as how available that buff is definitely has some merit there. But just a fantastic Warframe that I think new players should build really as soon as possible off their starter for the vast majority of the time, just due to the amount of things that he can really just like do and just not have any problems with across the board. Saren, unsurprisingly, Saren remains at an A+. Though I do want to talk about some shifts in kind of, I think, the way that Saren is being played. Because classically, Saren is like, you put your spores on enemies, you spread your spores, the spores just kill everyone, they spread to like everything in a gigantic, insane radius, and you can be rest assured that you can count on your spores to simply eliminate all the enemies. That has been the case for a long, long time, and that plan still works, but similar to a lot of things that we've gone over in this, it's a little slow. It's just a bit on the slow side to like just like let your spores do their dirty deeds. And instead, I think there's much more of a pivot on Saren into doing like Toxic Lash plus your spores buff, and like, you know, like using like miasma more sparingly whenever it like makes sense on spores, and instead just like going buffing and just invincibility. Obviously like a persistence build like I've done on Saren. Even before persistence, I was on a health build for Saren that worked quite well just due to the way spores interact with gloom. But with the advent of persistence, you just get true, just complete invulnerability, provided your armor remains high enough and you don't get magnetic procced. That being the case, like just going through and having her insane buffs, like the way Toxic Lash interacts with things like the Sobek, and I mean, just is generally powerful, is incredibly good. You can add things on top of this, whether that's like Roar or Zadas or whatever else. to just do crazy stuff with weapons. And I think that has been the big shift for Saren, is that Saren is still doing absolutely incredible things, but it is a lot less Spores focused now, where Spores interaction with Gloom to make you invincible is much more the thing, and you're really using weapons to take care of problems quickly, I think, more so now. Sevagoth remains at A rank for me. Of course, the same things are pretty much going to be said here as were said on the last review video, in that, hey, it turns out whenever you throw Roar over your Shadow and then use your 2 plus your 1, and that maths out to be dealing 100% of the health of all of the enemies that you are nearby, and it just kills them all instantly in a vicious explosion, that's pretty good. That is what Red Mage Sevagoth has been up to, and it is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Now, I do want to note that there's a reason there's no plus here. You are frail. It is a usually shield-gated build, almost always, that you are relying on that constant spend of energy to keep you alive, and the energy costs are not particularly low. There are definitely situations you can get yourself into where it's like, oh, this boss that my combination of abilities don't work on, I'm going to have to spend a ton of energy to shield gate through this boss and just do what I have to do with weapons. Those situations do come up with this build. But in any kind of a semi-normal situation, even most special enemies are vulnerable to it as well. You will just blow up enemies instantaneously, and they will not survive first contact with visibly acquiring a Sevagoth. And that has just a tremendous baseline amount of power, where, like, you know, very often it will be the case where even in like a heavy steel path mission, it'll be, oh, there's a Sevagoth in this mission, and then you look at the Warframes we've talked about in the past that need to meter manage, like Baruuk, and Baruuk goes, oh, I'm not doing anything this mission. And that I think is a very, very big thing to note, is that the kill power that is on display with Sevagoth is truly high level. Styanax, who as of the recording for this video should be our next Prime. Styanax, previously I had him rated as an A+, and you'll be happy to know for the Prime that is absolutely not changing. Styanax still incredibly, incredibly powerful. Of course, he has the ability with Rally Point plus Final Stand to provide functionally unlimited energy when combined with Nourish to multiply not only the damage of Final Stand by giving it that viral damage, but also by making the energy output of Rally Point much higher for yourself and all of your allies, to generate like upwards like 15 energy plus per second for you and your entire squad. Not to mention killing allies, killing enemies will also regenerate shields for the entire team, and with the 4 augment, also every single hit of the spears will give you and your entire squad overguard, which is of course the best kind of defensive stuff you can be giving to your allies, and that's just incredibly good across the board. Axios Javelin is like the notable, you will replace this with usually Nourish as the helmet. But Thera Strike, even on its own, this defense reduction also even still comes up and is incredibly, incredibly good. Just like a really well put together package of having like a solid DPS ability that is also defensive and helps your squad, along with a very, very powerful relevant buff for you and of course your squad. And you just combine that with another one, Nourish, plus a good utility ability, and you get yourself a very good and powerful support / solo capable Warframe. Let's talk Temple. So I don't personally think that much has really changed for Temple overall in the way that they are being used. I am keeping them just at a B. They already were at a B, just keeping them right where they were. Very solid. Exalted solo with getting Lizzie out and just being able to have an exalted flamethrower that does a very good amount of damage that can be built in a variety of ways to see success, whether that is through your condition overload styles or whether just it's stacking heat procs and like just solid stuff to be doing here. Very good damage, good weapon. Ripper's Wail, which while it has a much longer cast time than I would really like, is giving you all of your shields back, plus you're going to be invulnerable whenever you cast it. So that combined with the very, very big damage buff that it is giving you for that heat damage, it is a generally quite good ability that I think in general the big downside here is you spend so much time casting it whenever you get to higher levels that it can be a little overall cumbersome in order to like cast it that much. It is very good, of course, at buffing Exalted Solo and making this even more powerful, and you're usually not going to have trouble killing enemies, but it can be slow going whenever you need to throw your shields back on every, 15, 20 seconds, even in like more regular Steel Pass style content. In addition, Overdrive, while Overdrive is a solid buff for you, I do generally find that it is not super necessary, and it's usually just like going to be here just for you to build a little bit of meter with. And speaking of that, Pyrotechnics, this, not on Nezha, doesn't really do any damage and is kind of only here for building meter. So you kind of have a lot of time spent where you're casting Pyrotechnics to make sure you have the meter to keep Exalted Solo going. But whenever you're casting the Pyrotechnics, it itself is not really accomplishing very much, even if you're hitting that beat every single time, which is a bit unfortunate. So I think that there's kind of a bit of a unfortunate, like, Ripper's Wail and Pyrotechnics, and like the theming of it is all great and stuff, but it's a bit cumbersome and slow with the ways that you will end up going through a mission whenever you probably just want to burn everything down with a flamethrower. And be done with it. You kind of have to go through this whole process with any kind of a group of enemies that you're really fighting, and like be throwing Overdrive out and Pyrotechnics and like managing the metronome and doing all those things and making sure you keep on beat. And it's a lot of stuff. I really like Temple, but it's a lot of stuff to be doing to make sure they're doing everything they can. We're talking about Titania once again. Titania has been at A+ for a while and of course remains at A+. I do want to say that I do think that there are some reasonable complaints with like the way Titania's kit works, but the one big thing that Titania does, which is just being by far the fastest Warframe in the game and making her just incredible at all of your super fast game modes, your captures, your exterminates, your spies, all of those types of missions that like really don't prevent you from just doing them, especially at low level, where you can use the Firefly build with Thermal Sunder and all such like that, makes Titania absolutely crazy. Razorwing with her augment is just absolutely insane. You are insanely fast, and it is incredibly, incredibly good. Now, to note, there are definitely things that I would change about Titania, but just what she is used for is so incredibly powerful. I think it would be foolish to put her below A+ for me personally. Even though, like, Lantern doesn't really do much without her augment, and even with the augment, it's a little lackluster. Tribute has kind of a bunch of like redundant things on it where this ability could really be simplified and down to like some better buffs for it to give on just like tap and hold, much like we saw with Vauban, which we're going to get to pretty soon. And Spellbind obviously does not do that much besides make you status immune, which I think is fine. But some improvements in the Razorwing for her guns, especially to give them like unlimited ammo, I think would really go a long way with helping Titania shine as more than being just super insanely fast. And she could do a bit more in terms of her like actual output in missions, not usually relying so much on whatever helmet that she happens to be bringing in order to do kind of the other part of the mission. Which I did just like want to take, like I'm pretty sure we all basically know how good Titania is at the stuff that she does do, but I just want to take the opportunity to talk about the things that she could be better at, I think. Though again, I think a Warframe that is used this much and is this powerful for the things that she does do, probably pretty unlikely to be changed in the near future. Trinity. So Trinity, post her changes, post her buffs, I had at just a B. And I actually really still think that Trinity kind of is just a B. The stuff that she does works. Plain and simple, it does just kind of work. She has damage reduction on Link, and obviously is able to strip armor with Link on limited targets. And she has Blessing, which for you and your entire squad is going to turn on all of your shield gates and obviously also offer the damage reduction and just generally good things in an extremely large radius. Trinity can kind of just like waltz through whatever she wants with this ability, and Link activated. You have an incredibly high amount of DR. You have Energy Vampire to provide yourself and also your whole team with a ton of energy. You combine that with this being like actually a pretty good single target damage ability because it does do straight % damage to enemies. And you've got like some decent stuff to go around. I will say I really wish the Energy Vampire was better with certain subsumes and things, but because of Link, it usually is not. And Well of Life, the changes to this I don't think really help Trinity so much as it helps when this is a subsumed ability for you to like, if allies die, enemies in the Well of Life die in their stead. That is like a quirky support ability, but generally speaking, if you are the Trinity, you're just going to be giving them blessing and they're not going to be dying due to that, much more so than there being a Well of Life randomly available. But I will say in the subsume, this does usually come up as like a quirky choice that is like pretty good for a number of different Warframes. But for Trinity herself, it will usually be where you will resolve to change it to a much more effective output buff for you, whether that is like your Roar or sometimes even Eclipse, which is a funny one, to combine with her other sources of damage reduction. But yeah, that's what's up with Trinity. Very just like middle of the road, very middle feeling. Feels very B to me. I will say, I do think that without any kind of help, this probably will start to degrade, as I think we're going to continue to get more interesting tools and stuff like persistence for Warframes to take advantage of. And if those things don't happen to apply to Trinity, which they haven't recently, that could affect her negatively in the long term. But for now, I think I'm pretty comfortable at a B for her. Just good overall performance. All right, the one I'm sure everyone wants to know about, Uriel. Uriel, our newest Warframe given to us in the recent December update. He is new to the list, and I think that Uriel is designed immaculately. I think that his design is very, very good. His demons are useful. Katanak, Gulfagor, and Vithelis all have like interesting effects that are powerful whenever they are working correctly. Katanak is just the most powerful ability, arguably, that is on Kullervo. Gulfagor really gives you good resources, and Vithelis can give your weapons a nice boost, which is quite good. And of course, is going to help you build your passive meter, which is going to be for your 4. Infernalis is a very, very good movement ability that helps you be good at the faster missions and just from getting objective to objective, which I think is really, really positive for him. And the passive damage is actually good enough in lower levels and even for like some basic Steel Pass stuff to just like kill off passively a lot of your basic enemies. Remedium is your tanking ability, which just heals you and all of your demons to full. Just heal everybody up, put your shields back on, just make it happen. This is incredibly solid at keeping you alive. It is a little bit spammy and can be a little bit cumbersome, but it's a pretty quick cast overall. And you're not going to be spamming it too hard the vast majority of the time. Your third ability, Demonium, this is what you're going to be spamming a whole lot if you're going to want to be spamming your 4 a whole lot, which you almost assuredly will be. But just in general, this is a damage vulnerability, which is hugely positive, and it's going to make it so that you are going to make enemies very vulnerable to just being murdered by it. Like worst case scenario, you're using a good gun plus Demonium to kill enemies and build your meter up. And you're building your meter up for, of course, Brimstone. Brimstone, when your meter is full, this, in almost all cases, is simply kills every enemy that's in its radius. You make this radius absolutely huge, and when your meter is full, you can decide that the map is no longer full of enemies. Obviously, incredibly powerful, and feels really good to cast. I currently have some misgivings with the consistency of this, and of course, with Uriel being the newest and most shiniest of new toys, I do, of course, tend to have that caution with the new stuff to not want to really overrate just like how strong it can be, because of course everyone's got that new shiny bias a little bit. For those reasons, I do think it is entirely possibly reasonable that Uriel could be an A- in the future whenever we've got more just general experience with him and how like he's going to perform and feel like a really great choice going forward into new content. But for now, I have decided to put him just at B+, which I think is very solid. I, want to see how he's going to work out into like the farther future. But with the game's current content, there are a couple places even now where he can get a little weird with it and not really be able to do a ton in certain situations where you're just not going to really be able to get your meter effectively, where you end up just kind of being in your 1 and using your 2 a bit while shooting guns and applying your 3 to like a few enemies. and that can be not as good a thing to be doing as a lot of other Warframes have access to currently, but we'll see how this plays out over the course of the next year. I could definitely see Uriel moving up or down just based on what the content evolves to or if he gets new tools. Now, possibly the biggest glow up on this entire tier list is Valkyr. Now, Valkyr went through some turmoil, obviously had a rework, kind of removed her top end and like really her safety and ability to really play at level cap in a way that felt particularly good, but gained a lot of interesting things in her rework. There's lots of like interesting damage boosts, and like you don't necessarily have to like always be in your 4 in order to take invincibility. You can use other things. The boosts and like kind of smoothing out of her kit was very good. Combine that with the end of year giving us persistence, which is, I mean, feels almost tailor-made specifically for Valkyr in some cases to really hammer home that not dying factor for her. And you get an increase to her grade from B all the way up to a solid A. I don't think she's quite at the level where I would want to give her a plus, but I think that she is incredibly, incredibly powerful right now. Incredible amounts of damage to be output with Hysteria. The claws are so strong currently. And getting into the rhythm of a build utilizing Swing Line to make Rip Line free makes her not only fast, but able to group enemies and really eliminate groups so quickly. And of course, Warcry being on for a much needed, well, not usually needed necessarily, buff for Hysteria, but a very powerful one. The one thing I will say is that I do wish, again, that the stance was changed to be even better on Hysteria's basic moves, as you will end up wanting to spin attack a whole lot of the time still, which I think is still a little bit of a downside, that the base moves are not a little bit more mobile, a little bit more quick, and you're usually going to have to go with the spin attacks to get through areas and kill all the enemies in them as fast as you possibly can. But her base moveset has also still been improved quite a bit. But yeah, good things for Valkyr, very applicable to like pretty much anything at this current point. And her base level survivability with persistence, even if you're not built up her meter, is just so incredibly high. Vauban, our most recently changed Warframe. Obviously, he got his big rework that really smoothed out a lot of things with his kit. Smoothed out Mine Layer in particular, combining to the Tether Flechette and the Vector Overdrive pad instead of having the 4 separate mines, which really cleans up how you're going to be casting these abilities. And I think that overall the Flechette orbs have received a pretty big glow up here in terms of their consistency whenever they're affecting enemies, and it's much easier to just like have that buff always applied. I will say I do think it's a little annoying to have to use the Vector pad at all, but you know, they wanted to keep it around for like just like the goofy fun sake of it, and I get that. Tesla Nervos was not really changed outside of some augment stuff that I think works okay. Photon Strike was changed. Unfortunately, I do not think that it was enough of a buff overall. It's definitely usable now, but it's still definitely on the lower end of different damaging abilities that we could be using. It's thankfully the preview video is wrong. It is not this insanely slow charge up anymore. And using this with the augment is reasonably effective to get the like multi-strikes down, even if it will still ragdoll enemies out of its radius of the follow-up shots pretty regularly. And then, of course, finally, Bastille and Vortex. These were not changed in huge ways, but like lots of just quality of life was basically added to them to make them much easier to use, where enemies won't get knocked out of it by Photon Strike anymore, for example. So you can mitigate that by using Bastille and Vortex. So that is a consideration. Overall, though, he was at a C rank for me, and I think it's only probably reasonable to bump Vauban up to a C+. His kit certainly works better than it did before, but I still think there's a lot of like the same kind of trappings and things that you would fall into that are the downsides here with Vauban. You can do the stuff with his kit. It's more convenient now, but the stuff that you're getting is just generally, it's fine. You're not very survivable, and you don't have like just like decent survivability as a baseline. You don't have any great way to protect yourself from like overguarded enemies or anything like that, and it's just a little tough overall. But it's definitely been improved. It's definitely a thing where Vauban has for sure gotten better, and I definitely enjoy playing him much more now. I will say that. But it's not enough better, I think, unfortunately, to boost us into that B rank category. Let's talk about Volt. As spoiled much earlier in this video, he is also at A- along with the other starters. And this is the point where I will discuss that I do think of the starters in terms of their late game applications, whenever you have like a ton of mods and a lot of investment that you can do, I think that Volt probably overall of the starter Warframes shines the brightest. With that, I will note that you kind of need Volt Prime for that. That energy max difference is really, really actually important in this case. But building out a fully invested Volt Prime is very, very strong. You are incredibly fast, able to do missions extremely quickly, utilize that speed with really powerful melee weapons to really have no trouble cutting your way through any amount of enemies, and you can subsume over, usually with like something like Eclipse for very solid survivability. You have Shock Trooper on your one. Shock Trooper is an incredible buff, especially for melee weapons, and you still have very solid versatility that applies not only in the early game for Electric Shield, but also in the later game for being able to defend objectives and really even just defend yourself. The only thing that really usually doesn't come together is Discharge. There are some builds you can use at lower levels to clear with Discharge, but it's not something I would ever really recommend, even to a newer player, and especially not with regular Volt, as those builds are very energy intensive. But overall, the combination of like Electric Shield, Speed, and Shock with its augment, although it is worth noting that Shock for new players is actually pretty good at taking out groups of enemies at low level. This combination of abilities really just works so well for a huge variety of tasks whenever you are much deeper into the game and really have the investment to give Volt. It's super worthwhile. And he also makes a very solid starter, which while I prefer Mag, probably, I think that Volt is my runner-up choice currently as a starter. We're talking about Varuna. We're talking about the Wolf Pack. So for Varuna, it is worth noting here that her grade is definitely being impacted by available weaponry. I did really generally like slam weapons with Varuna for how her kit usually likes to interact with melee weapons. So she is a little bit being affected by the big slam nerfs that we did see. That being said, I also think generally I may have overrated her just a smidge. So we're moving her down from A to A-. So the problems that you're usually going to encounter on Varuna is that she is capable of going invisible, being invisible, having an enemy be marked, using your 2 on them, rolling your statuses, and that killing that enemy and then killing every other enemy in a tremendous radius. And that is your best case scenario. But having played a lot more Varuna, there are a couple scenarios that can also come up. So number one, with your slam weapons being worse, it's like a little bit more annoying to have Lyceth's Hunt provide you with infinite energy. Still totally can just use the Titron, and it will work for giving you a bunch of energy, just a little bit more finicky. And of course, we're always subsuming over Ulfrin's Descent. Unfortunately, this ability just doesn't quite cut it, so this is always going to be subsumed over for something else. But with Fangs of Rosh and Shroud of Dinar, there is a core 2 problems. Number one is whenever you roll badly on Fangs of Rosh. The way that this ability currently works, you use your 2 on an enemy. The statuses that are applied the first time you cast Fangs are the only statuses that will spread to all the enemies when that enemy dies. That is the core issue, because you will get unlucky. And that unluckiness will give you, say, like cold and some other less effective stats like impact and such that don't really do much to actually kill this guy. And then maybe you get like 1 damaging status, so it's doing like a lower amount of damage. That's unfortunate because Shroud of Dinar with the augment will only mark 1 guy. So if you rolled poorly on this enemy, you kind of just have to kill them. And you get energy, of course, because you kill them with your melee weapon and it spreads that stuff. But you really need to, you really get delayed every time you get unlucky with the set of statuses that you are spreading. And that's not too big of a factor. The larger factor is Shroud of Dinar hitting enemies that are very non-fortuitous. So you hit enemies like Necromex, or you hit enemies that are like the Babaos in 1999, and those enemies like that just take much longer to kill, really slows down what your game plan is. Again, not the biggest deal in the world. The biggest deal in the world is whenever you activate Shroud of Dinar and you have very competent teammates. Very competent teammates will very often murder your marked enemy before you get to them. And that will happen for straight up minutes at a time in very good squads. Now, you may not experience that, but it is a thing that can happen, and I think it gives a like similar vibe to how Baruuk, even though he is so very, very good, can kind of get locked out by powerful squads that contain like a lot of these A+ Warframes we've talked about, like Mesa, for example, or like Mirage in some cases, or Citrine, and like those types of like A+ tier Warframes can sometimes denigrate your game. I think that's the right word. Your game plan a bit. And that can be, I think, enough to push Varuna down into the A- category. But overall, she's obviously still very, very good. Just those couple little quirks that I think are worth noting that I think push her down just a smidge. We're talking about Wisp, which means I need to justify some things, probably. So I have decided to not move Wisp's grade. She was previously at A, and she is staying at A. This is even on the back of her being a persistence viable Warframe that has like a ton of different things she can do, and a huge amount of versatility with her 4, with her augment even being viable for like defending points and even dealing damage, especially accompanied with Breach Surge, and all of the powerful things that you can accomplish with Wisp. She has a lot going for her. But overall, she is a little bit below what the A+ category currently feels like. She doesn't really have like an incredible like output things she can do with Soulgate, even with the augment. It has some like compromised little bits to it here and there. Breach Surge is obviously amazing, but it is a little bit on the slower end. It's more control-y. A lot of like the other Warframes that use it, you'll note, are using it to bump themselves up closer to Wisp's level, but I don't think that Breach Surge by itself just on Wisp can really just like instantly make her A+, even though it is a fantastic ability. Her 1, notably, huge boon to all of the persistence Warframes that have recently come around. That vitality increase is quite nice, and any more health per second that you can give out to the Warframes using persistence is something they're almost always going to be valuing. And of course, the speed mode is great, and the electric mode is almost always very good. Notably, very funnily, it can turn on Archon Stretch for other Warframes. So if you're really going super hard into the teamwork, that's a thing that you can also add in as part of the potential support, I suppose, for what Wisp is outputting. So just a good support package that's really easy and just like always visible and there and easy for your teammates to pick up and get. And her 2, which is just invisibility, just like kind of on a button. Usually this normally I would say currently is her subsume slot, where you're usually going to be replacing this, though a lot of people do still choose to replace Soulgate, which I understand. She's a really full package of just good things that you can be doing that I think weirdly just fall a little shy still of that A+ category. But this is one of the ones where I would be really curious to hear about from you in the comments if you think that she's at the A level, or if you would move her up, or maybe even down potentially with how she is currently performing. But I think she's right at A currently, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. And now for one that should need absolutely no justification whatsoever. Wukong was at A+, and he is still absolutely at A+. Truthfully, it is completely shocking to me that somehow Spin Kong was released from his astral prison to walk the earth again, and that has not been changed. The fact that we have influence-capable spin attack Wukong loose in the game truly blows my mind. You combine that with, of course, Celestial Twin, with any number of weapons that are appropriate for it, being able to just be a passively very powerful ally for you. That is, of course, also able to use Primal Fury in concert with you, though at a less effective degree. And then that all, of course, compounds with Cloudwalker being incredibly high speed, incredibly good for just like, spy vaults, just really anything. It heals you to full. You can use this to make use of persistence and stuff, though I'm not a huge fan of doing it that way. And the laundry list is the laundry list. There's just almost nothing that Wukong can't do. And there's a million different ways to build him. Usually, of course, you're subsuming over Defy for whatever it happens to be that you want. There's a really large amount of build flexibility. I mean, you could tell me that you were going Thermal Sunder with its augment on Wukong, and I'd be like, yeah, that'll probably work, even though it's probably suboptimal. It almost certainly won't matter because Wukong is in such a strong state right now. And it's even still viable to do like the previous builds that don't even use Primal Fury. If you just want to completely forego the melee plan altogether, you still just totally can, and it will more than work out. Absolutely incredibly strong in just whatever it is you want to do. Super powerful Warframe. Now, if Wukong was released from the astral prison, it almost feels like Zaku is being slowly put inside one. I am lowering Zaku's grade from A down to just A-, but this is in large part because of a thing I've mentioned over a few different Warframes so far, which is that those armor changes came in and they made it just better. The game is better, I think, with the armor changes, but the health increase that happened and the non-scaling and the no scaling changes to the scaling Warframes that removed armor, like Zaku, means that the abilities that relied on the old way that the math worked are just worse than they were before. So in general, right now, I think it's not quite enough to just rely on the Grasp of Loki to do the DPS thing that you needed to do. You usually need to back it up with weapons or some other like helmet ability that can make it so that your Grasp of Loki just has like more time, whether that is like, of course, Harrow's ability or any number of other choices you can make. There's all kinds of applicable solutions in that way. But the long and the short of it is that Grasp of Loki is very important, and it is worse now than it has been in the past on Zaku, and that has affected their grade a bit. Of course, in general, Zada's Whisper, it's always been unfortunate that Zada's Whisper is a buff for guns that doesn't work on Grasp of Loki, which is a bunch of hovering guns that you take from enemies that don't count as weapons for all of the different weapon buffs that you can give out. And that has always been unfortunate and is usually why it has resulted in Zada's Whisper being removed from Zaku. But I could definitely see a future where instead we are going for the removal of the Grasp of Loki on Zaku, and instead opting for a more guns heavy like Sobek style build with weapons that interact with Zada's Whisper in positive ways, much akin to the way that Saren has shifted, though I would be pretty sad to lose the Grasp of Loki style build as being kind of the go-to thing for Zaku, utilizing the Vast on Time to make all your durations very long, and of course the Lost to remove all of the defenses in a pretty large area. I will say about the Lost Gaze is actually still very good. There are certain enemies that you can just hit with this that stun them that you really wouldn't think would work, such as like the Liminus in the EDA and ETA. You can just stop them in their tracks and make them remove all the defenses from the enemies around them. Makes them much less annoying in those different cases, and things like that kind of continue to come up with Gaze. But good stuff overall. Still very powerful Warframe, obviously still at A-, but just getting a little bit worse and kind of feeling it as time goes on here. Now, second to last, I've got a bit of a weird one for you. So Yreli was at B+, and nearing in on the end of the year, I was like, no, I think Yreli probably is about an A- Warframe. Her survivability is like so good compared to a lot of other Warframes right now, and she's just got like a number of buffs that she's kind of passively always keeping up, not having to ride Marolina anymore. These are all good things that are really helping Yreli out. And then the end of the year brought us Persistence. And Persistence kind of shifted the ratio a bit to, I think, keep Yreli kind of exactly as good as she was. She's still just at B+, which of course is still a good grade, but I really was, for a large middle portion of last year, thinking that this was going to be the year where Yreli would actually have a kind of like passively like been buffed, got her prime and like all these things, and like it was just eventually going to be she would be at like low A as kind of a subset version of what Revenant can do. But I think it's just barely not turned out that way due to the big shakeup with the update at the end of the year. It is, of course, still unfortunate that Aqua Blades is like not like a real build to go through, but like the 2 augment for Marolina and Sea Snares being like a nice good combination where their damage vulnerabilities are 2 separate multipliers that multiply together for really large damage outputs. Riptide being like a nice grouping ability where that's going to be applicable, and of course just being able to recast Marolina for not only the damage reduction, which 90% of course is very good, but also for those 4 seconds of invulnerability being able to be chained back to back for just true invincibility at the drop of a hat. That was really, really positive in the middle of last year, but we have a lot of things that are more comparable to it now with persistence frames like Hydroid and the like being able to just be kind of doing that stuff as their natural state of existence and not having to go through the hoops that Ureli needs to jump through in order to achieve a similar thing. Still, the damage buffs and just general grouping ability, and of course, if you like and enjoy using Marolina, you can be quite fast in a number of situations where the tile set is not too troublesome. And of course, the passive buff for secondary weapons. Unfortunately, secondary weapons specifically, but that high critical chance buff is definitely also really positive. But yeah, good things overall for Ureli. Definitely just a weird thing for the shakeup. Maybe she'll be a part of the next shakeup and finally get that little boost over to the A's. And finally, as she has been since her release, Zephyr. Zephyr still absolutely amazing. No one is playing her. She is an A+ tier Warframe. Zephyr is absolutely crazy. Being able to plop down her tornadoes and just like drastically multiply in a large AoE whatever damage you're able to put into them is ridiculous. Turbulence makes you invulnerable to almost everything in the entire game by redirecting all of the damage somewhere else. And if that is not making you immune to the damage, almost assuredly, literally being able to fly will. There are a bunch of Tailwind builds that like literally do infinite damage that you can just like utilize that way if you want to have like a cute funny build. Airburst is really good grouping that is usually, of course, going to be used to bring enemies into the tornado to be able to drastically scale damage on them. Zephyr is just absolutely amazing. I will say again, I will repeat for the 2nd year in a row, the only thing at this point that DE could within any reason give Zephyr is a deluxe or an heirloom skin with a huge ass and big tits, and anything short of that simply won't work. There's nothing within reason that they could give her at this point. Nothing else will work, I think. And now, for those of you that have stuck with me through this entire video, or if you skipped to the end, I have a fun special surprise. We're going to do a lightning round. So at the very bottom here, we have the Necromex and we have all of the Archwings. And I'm not going to do separate videos on these. So lightning round, Voidrig is S tier, Bone Widow is B tier, and that's pretty much just the way that it's going to be. Voidrig is crazy and Bone Widow is fine. Over here, Amisha is S tier, Itzel is A tier, and Elytron, Odonata, and the Odonatas are B tier. Like Itzel, the speed is very good and the grouping ability is very good. Amisha can't be beat in pretty much any category, and the Elytra and the Odonatas are just fine for whatever you happen to be doing. They're okay at it. So fun little lightning round at the end there, so the people know how the things feel with these systems that are unlikely to have things added to them, let's be honest. But yeah, that's going to do it for the full roster review 2026. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. It has been a very, very good year, and I'm very much looking forward to the year going forward with Warframe. I think, you know, at this point, I'm looking forward to Anniversary 14. It's been the case where I think the D really has a grasp on making the game better and releasing really good content updates, and it's just been great. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you all for those content updates, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. All right, thank you for watching, everyone. It is time to thank the patrons, and there are so many of you now, including our $10 patrons, who I will name now: Atheon, Ith, Alex Parnham, Arbiter Daydream, Barkus, Nuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Canolathra, Clob World 3, Deathly NL, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, James Hearththorne, JC4 Science, Jesse Haynes, Josh, Nightcar 1981, Lord Ian, Luzanth, Luckmod, Matt Holt, Mike Kiesman, Mikokel, Michta, Nerve, One Man Wolfpack, Rellerin, Ruby, S267, Sanyu _ Season, Sharp247, Snap the Mag, The Coupon of Death, Waifu Wars, Baudad, Zerafir, and Zero Weebs Plan, and all of the $5 patrons and $2 patrons as well. Thank you all so very much. There are so many of you now. There is very little time to say anything else at the end of these videos, but I really appreciate the support a great deal.